All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will call this meeting to order. Can I get a motion, please, that the agenda for the February 1st, 2022 regular meeting of council be adopted as presented? Councillor Chenard will make that motion. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carried. We do have Councillor Byer that's joining us via Zoom this evening. Welcome, Councillor Byer. Can I get a motion, please? The minutes of the January 18th, 2022 regular meeting of council be adopted as presented. Councillor Moore will make that motion. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carried. We have no public hearings, but we do have two delegations this evening, and we will start with Community Futures West Yellowhead. General Manager Nancy Robbins joining us with an overview and an update. Welcome, Ms. Robbins.
Hi, everybody. I am here in Jasper tonight in my very busy household, and I've hopefully found a little spot where you can hear me okay. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Nancy Robbins. I am the General Manager of Community Futures West Yellowhead. We're a nonprofit organization offering the Community Futures program to the West Yellowhead region, which is Jasper, Hinton, Edson, Grand Cache, and Yellowhead County, and also the cooperatives in the MD of Greenview surrounding the hamlet of Grand Cache. What we do is really offer a national program funded by the Government of Canada through Prairies Can, which some of you in the past have probably heard of as Western Economic Diversification. Their names were changed in the last budget. And so we receive federal funding to offer business coaching, financing, training, and community economic development in the West Yellowhead region. In the past almost 2 years now, we've been doing a lot of pandemic relief and recovery work, and I'll get to that in a moment. So to talk a little bit about the business coaching that we offer a range of programs, anywhere from general coaching for you to start up, maintain, or sell your business. We have coaches now located in Hinton, Grand Cache, and in Edson, and so they're based right in our core communities. And we also offer specialized programming, one being the Entrepreneurs with Disabilities program, where we can help people that have barriers to mainstream employment look at self-employment as an option, help them build their business idea. And then also we have some funding to help them out to get started. We have Project Gazelle, which is our women's entrepreneurship program that is offered throughout Northern Alberta. And we partner with our offices in the north that we work with to offer that program. And Lemonade Day, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, is on June 18th this year. We're really excited to be offering Lemonade Day again in our communities. It's an opportunity for kids to set up stands. They learn all about business planning. They have to pitch their product. They learn about cost of sales and how to make profit. And part of this program is we ask them to save a little bit of money, to spend a little bit of money, and to share a little bit of money. So they all have to pick a charity of their choice to give a third of their profit to. And our new program that we're also starting is our Digital Services Squad. We just hired someone in the last 2 weeks to work with businesses onto helping them become more mainstream digital friendly. So this is a grant we've received for 18 months from Business Link, which is our counterpart in the cities in Alberta. And we're able to help people assess where they are in their businesses and to do a quick assessment to see what they need. And once they figure out whether they need social media, website, anything like that in the technical field, we then help them develop that and get the resources. For business training, we do a lot of work where we try to meet the clients where we're at. In the past couple of weeks, we're finding a lot of pressure to help people with the looming 2-year anniversary of being in a pandemic. And so we're offering a mental health series live on Facebook for our business owners with Trevor Haas, who is a mental health worker in Hinton. And that's just an example of what we offer in terms of training. Financing, we have regular loans. I'm sure you're all familiar with our Town of Edson loan program, which we've been offering for about, I would say 14 months now, where we offer dollars from the Town of Edson to startups, maintaining businesses and also succession building businesses in Edson. And we also spent 18 months working with the Government of Canada doing the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund, where we issued 106 loans $3.5 million in recovery and relief funding for businesses during the pandemic. Community economic development is always at our forefront. We have a number of events coming up in Edson, one being our business walk on March 1st, and we'd like to invite all administration and council to join us as we pop in and visit some businesses. Just let me know, send me an email if you'd like to come. We have an open house on February 17th, where we're hoping that people will come by, see what kind of programming we offer, meet the staff. It's our attempt to try to do some more face-to-face meet and greets with people. And in February, on the 24th, we have our board meeting in Edson, and council and administration are always invited to join us for our monthly council meeting when we're in your community. And so that'll be February 24th. And, you know, we are a municipally owned business corporation. The town of Edson owns 20% of us. And so come on out and see all the things that we have to do. So as we head into the new year, we're all focused on pandemic recovery. We realize that our businesses need help with their labor market and attraction, which is a little bit outside the scope of Community Futures, but in an effort to try to help our small businesses, we're going to try to offer some things that can help them over the next year. Digital access, of course, is a really big part of what businesses need when restrictions are changing so often, and we are having to use the traditional pivot word to move into the new normal. And the supply chain is not something we can fix, but what we can do is we can talk about local products and help our farmers and our agritourism in the region to really try to boost their products locally, so we can take some of the pressure off the supply chain from elsewhere. So that's all I have, a lot of information, but I just wanted to come out and meet you and to answer any questions you might have about our organization. Of course, Councillor Beyer and Councillor Bevan serve time on our boards, and I'm sure they update you all the time and can answer any questions that you may have as well.
All right, thank you, Ms. Robbins, for your presentation here this evening. Council, do you have any questions? Looks like a quiet bunch tonight. You might get off the hook here. Oh, no, here you go. Councillor Bevan has a question. Go ahead, Councillor Bevan.
Through the chair to Nancy. No, actually, just to comment, Nancy, that on June 18th for our Lemonade Days, I know the mayor and I sat on the panel here that judges these young entrepreneurs. I'm hoping that they can come and present to us in person instead of just putting the liquid out there and we tasting it. We really have them to come and do a presentation to us and tell us how they made it and what their expectations are. So I'm hoping that we can set that up to go that way.
Yes, and last year we did it as a COVID measure, and the year before that we were 2 years before that we were able to do that. So I agree, Councillor Bevan. Fingers crossed, we'll be able to have the kids pitch their lemonade recipes to us, and of course, anyone who would like to drink a copious amount of lemonade is more than welcome to join us on both the recipe testing and, of course, on actual lemonade day. All you need is to be able to drink some very sweet product all day long. So if anyone's interested, just let me know. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Ms. Robbins, I'm thankful that my pancreas still has another 4 months to still recover from last spring. So that's a great event. Anybody else? Councillor Schnarr.
Through the chair to Nancy, thank you for your presentation. Just a quick question is, I know you're helping a lot of businesses with these COVID, through COVID recovery. Does it seem to be helping the businesses with the loans you're giving them?
Yes, you know what? Right now, financial capital is making all the difference in the world. And it's really helping a lot of businesses. It's really keeping their doors open. It's helping them as their staff are getting sick with COVID. It's helping them deal with restrictions and buy PPE, and it's making all the difference. So yes, we really see the long-term effects of it.
Just one follow-up.
Go ahead.
With the lemonade stands, can I give you a suggestion where I bet you have a lot of samplers? Because I have an event going on that same weekend, and so I can update you and I can bring you over and you'll have lots of people to sample it, because you do sell lemonade. So I will update you on a perfect spot where there'll be a lot of thirsty people.
Oh, that sounds like a plan. I'm going to send some kids your way, Councillor Chenard. Thank you.
And bring dog-friendly lemonade too. There'll be many dogs there.
All right, thank you. Anybody else have any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Robbins. You're free to stay if you like, or continue on with your evening.
Thank you, everybody. Please stay safe and healthy. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our second delegation, our RCMP 2021 year-end report presented by Staff Sergeant Christian Delisle, Detachment Commander of the Edson RCMP. And we have Mr. Delisle with us here this evening. Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Council. Thank you very much for having me tonight to present the Edson RCMP 2021 year-end report. Yes, so my report will be presenting the stats for the detachment. So we'll start with on the next slide. We'll be talking about the resources, staffing levels for the Edson detachment, the crime statistics for 2021, the annual performance plan priorities that we set for 21-22, where we're at, the budget for 21-22, the other initiatives that we did in 2021, and upcoming initiatives. And of course, we will have a question period at the end. So if we go to the next slide. So for our resource staffing level, so the town of Edson provides 17 police officers. So there's 17 municipal positions in Edson. We have a total of 23 regular members, and 17 of them are paid by the town. So we have my position as staff sergeant. We have the sergeant position, 3 corporals, and 12 constables. Out of those positions, I have 4 vacancies. Now, those positions are, I'm calling them vacancies, but it's not that we don't have anybody assigned to them. There's currently people that are either away due to medical leave. We have one on suspension, and some are due to come back shortly. So that's where we're at. So even though we have 4 vacancies, this is not affecting the service delivery that we provide to the community. We are what we call a detachment that works under a post system. So we have all our resources in one basket, if I can say, and then when there's a call for service that comes in, either in the town of Edson or in the county, the next police officer who's available to take the call takes the calls. So the vacancies, even though we have 4 out of 17 for the municipalities, it's basically 4 out of 23, which is not affecting at this point our service delivery. Now, if I move on to the crime statistics for 2021. So in 2021, the Edson detachment responded to 5,830 calls for service. 3,639 were within the town of Edson. That's about 0.5% less than last year. Just to give you a comparison, in 2017, there was 5,800 calls for service. In 2018, 6,000. In 19, about 6,200. And then in 2020, we have 5,500. So we're roughly about on average in par with the last 5 years. Those calls for service, if I break them down a little bit in before I go into the specifics of every categories, if I break them down into type for workload. So for 2021, the #1 type of calls that we received that was affecting our workload the most was what we call the Mental Health Act or other activities. So any call related to doing a welfare check on someone having possible in distress that needed RCMP's assistance, that represented about 6.16% of our workload. The second one would be the homicide that we got in 2021. Due to the complexity of a file like this, that took 5.6% of our workload. The advantage of being the RCMP is we have access to major crime unit. And so that 5.6% of the workload was basically picked up by the entire unit. We assisted with some statements, with some interviews and things like this, but the majority of the work was done by major crime unit, therefore not really affecting the impact on the service delivery in the town of Edson. Then we go to mischief, disturbing the peace, assault, sexual assault, frauds, and other thefts are all the other calls for service, and we go from 4% to 3% to 2%. In terms of count, we look at 331 calls for service for suspicious persons, for suspicious vehicles, suspicious property. Mischief was about 206. Other moving traffic, so traffic offenses, we're looking at 193. Assistance to general public, 193. Other moving traffic violation, 169. Well-being check, although being the number one for the workload, falls into the fifth category, or sixth one, sorry, at 148 calls for service. And then we move on to collisions, other theft, and mental act as well. So if we look in terms of count, the first criminal code offense that we have that impact our service that we provide to the community would be mischief. The rest, we have basically suspicious vehicles, we have traffic violations, and then only when we are at the seventh rank that we have other theft. So criminal code activities in terms of count is not what we're dealing with the most here in Edson, which is good news. The Alberta Rcmp is providing us new stats as well, and I'm happy to share that. It's basically our response time to call for service. So basically the time that they're giving me, it's for priority 1 and priority 2 type of calls. A priority 1 type of call, for example, is a call where it's a life or death situation. Calls for service, there's a high risk of injury, an urgent request from another agency, calls for service involving weapons, a domestic in progress. And then a priority 2 call would be like a crime in progress, something with a very short time delay. So a disturbance, a welfare check that is kind of happening right now or just about to be done, a regular request by another agency, a traffic offense, that would be a priority 2. So when we look at those 2 types of calls, for 2021, the average in the province was about 12.9 minutes for the RC to respond to those calls. Now, in the 12.9 minutes, Alberta Rcmp includes an average of 4.5 minutes to 6.5 minutes to basically take the call by the call taker, create a file, then send that to the dispatcher and whatnot. Sometimes it happens a little quicker, sometimes it can be a little longer, but they add about 5 to 6.5 minutes to that average. So for Edson, we're actually below that 12 minutes. So we're at 10.1 minutes per calls for service. So we have to take in consideration that 4.5 to 6.5 minutes for the administration of the call. So once we get the call, we on average take about 5 to 6 minutes to attend the calls for service. So now if we look at the statistic, if we could go back a couple of slides, please. Thank you very much. So if we look at our crime against person for 2020, if we compare with, for 2021, if we compare with 2020, we are at 18% less than last year. If we look at property crime, we are at 14% less than last year, and other criminal code, we are at 32% less than last year. So that gives us an overall total of about 19% less criminal code offenses for Edson in 2021 compared to last year, which is a great number. Few things to notice, and we'll talk about it a little bit further down during the report, but one of our, the objective that we set on our annual performance plan for Edson was to reduce the numbers of break-in enters. And in 2021, we saw 51% less break-in enters than in 2020. So we went from 152 calls for service involving a break-in enter to 75, which is amazing. Great work from my members on this. The reason for this, few. So one of the main one is we did not have in 2021 prolific offenders that were prolific at break-in enters. So that really helps. The second thing is we have started to do a lot more proactive patrols. which this in turns, well, deter some criminality, make some people maybe think twice to do a crime when they see these cars driving around. We've certainly adjusted some of the scoring. Some of the previous break-in enters should have been scored as trespassing or things like this. So we've done some changes there. And also I want to mention the pods did help. We did have few break-in enters into sheds or outbuildings where people were seeking shelter, especially when during cold days. With the avenue of the pods in Edson, that helped us reduce that number. So really good there. Another number I would like to point out in crime against property is theft of motor vehicle. We did see an increase in 2021. So we went from 48 total in 2020 to 68. So an increase of about 42%. So basically something that we would like to focus on in the upcoming year. Reason for the increase at this point, one of the factors that we're looking at is basically due to the boom that we see in Edson and the numbers of workers that are coming in town. There's an increase of opportunities. There's a lot more vehicles, a lot more trucks, at hotels and located pretty much everywhere in our area, work sites and whatnot, that are opportunities for people that are specialized, if I can say, in stealing motor vehicles. Other numbers that I would like to point out basically would be on the second page here. Would be our mental health calls. So basically, again, talking about our calls for service for people in distress or requesting assistance for Rcmp, welfare check. We saw a slight decrease. So we went from 137 in 2020 to 121. So still being in a pandemic, seeing a slight decrease in there, that's good. It's a good sign. It's still a high number. If we look back in 2018, where there was 95, same thing in 2019. So we can tell that COVID still has an impact, but at least we're on the downtrend here a little bit. And then on the next slide at the bottom, I like to monitor that number, the suspicious person, vehicle, and property number, so 331. So we're seeing an increase of 7% from last year. This is the number that I like to read to see if people are calling the police. Sometimes people are questioning if they should report things or not. I always say, please call. And so when I see an increase there of suspicious activities, then it gives me an indication that people are more willing to call the police. So we saw an increase there, so that's good news. Now, if we move on to the next slide, our annual performance plans priorities. So I'm doing right now a year-end presentation from January to December. The Rcmp calendar is a little different. We work from April to March. So some of the numbers there that I have is for our current performance plan that we have that is valid until the end of March. So it's really 3 quarters. But still, it will give us a really good picture at where we're going to be at the end of March. So if we look at crime reduction, like I mentioned, our goal was to reduce break-in enters by 10%. We beat that goal. We are at 51, and those are the numbers for January to December. This is the only statistic that I have that are for this year, like to 2021. So on that trend, I can totally see our annual performance plan by the end of the next quarter still being within the 10% that we wanted to achieve. Another point that we put under criminal crime reduction would be a visibility patrol. So we set a goal to have 1,000 documented visibility patrols done in town and in the county. So far, for 3 quarters, only in the town of Edson, we've done and documented 669 patrols. There's another 400 plus patrols that were done in the county, so we're well within that goal. So again, we have achieved that goal. The second point is community engagement. We wanted to have 4 consultations this year and 24 contacts with the public. In terms of consultation, we have done so far 2, one with the Youth Council in November, and I've done the Town Hall in November as well. I did complete one in the county as well. I met with some business owners and peers. But then I still have a quarter to complete here, and I'm planning on having some consultation for future priorities for the upcoming years of 22, 23. In terms of contact, again, members did a great job with the contacts. So we have documented through our patrols and through activities that we did 12 community contact of high visibility. So the examples would be foot patrols during Canada Day, the Jamboree, the block party on 3rd Avenue, the car show, the lights up that we had during the winter, members attending red search ceremonies on November 11th. So these are 12 like major that we documented. We also have smaller contacts. For example, a young gentleman across the West Haven School had a stand for a refreshment during the hot wave. And so a member paid him a visit and gave him a certificate for his work and whatnot. So there's other contacts that we did like this during the year. So that are worth mentioning as well. School contacts. So it's a little difficult during a pandemic to be present and visible in the school, but we're trying to stay in touch with the school. So I'm asking the members to reach out to the school they're assigned to. And for the first three quarters of the year, we've made 15 contacts with different schools, either in person or through phone, just to see how things are going and you know, keeping in touch with the schools. Other contacts that are worth mentioning, there was a CEPTED presentation done to the Chamber of Commerce. There was, you know, our presence at the skate park during the summer, our involvement with the shelter pods, and then we have increased our media release. And recently we've sent 12 media releases just to keep the population a little bit more appraised of what the Rcmp is doing, the kind of crime trend that is happening, our results in arresting people and whatnot. So we've done 12 of those and planning on continuing releasing more of those. And the last priority that we have, it's more of an internal priority. It's to always better the members that are the detachment here. It's to increase the numbers, of course, that are taken by the members. Again, a little difficult during a pandemic because there's restrictions on the numbers of people that can attend course. Is it in person or not? But so far, we were able to have 14 courses taken by the members. So in-person and online combined. It ranged from child interviewing, field coaching, supervisor course, critical incident management, things like this. So 14. So again, our goal was to about 4 courses. So we're well above what we set for the year. So again, that's really good. If we go to the next slide, budget. Year to date, the budget is approximately 71% of the forecasted amount for the fiscal year. I know the way the Rcmp forecast the budget is a little different than the forecasted budget through the town of Edson. I believe your budget includes protective services. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the numbers that I'm using here are the numbers for the Rcmp. So the initial forecast was about 2,351,000, and then so we're at 71% of that number. Year to date, we've used about 53% of the forecasted overtime budget that was planned for the year. It was about forecasted for 125,000. We're about 53% of this. And yes, these numbers are based for the first 3 quarters. So I'm expecting to be within budget for the last quarter. If we move on to the next slide. Other initiatives that we did in 2021. So there was a creation of the exchange zone, basically a place where people can do exchange of things that they're selling through Kijiji, through Facebook, in a safe environment. Here in front of our detachment, we have our sign, and people are free to use that zone anytime that they feel that the transaction they're going to be doing, it would be preferable to be done somewhere else than at their personal residence. That zone is available. We participated in the creation and start of the shelter pods, something I'm personally very proud of. It was something that the community needed. We have a vulnerable population that needs our support, and that was great to be part of the start of the shelter pod. Working through COP and with Bannister, the safety screws for the license plate. So far, a good success. I had to drop off some more screws at banisters because they ran out. And we do get a lot of thefts of license plates. So having screws that are harder for criminals to remove is a plus for us. We assisted Scan in shutting down a residence in Glenwood that was causing some problems. So that was another initiative we did. And we did in around November, a warrant roundup. So for about 3 weeks, we basically challenged ourselves to see how many warrants we can execute. And we located approximately 30 people and then executed 50 warrants during that period of time. So again, another great initiative. Upcoming initiative. So starting this week, I got a message from Alberta Rcmp and province-wide. There's an operation called Operation Cold Start. It's to address a theft of motor vehicle. Great timing for us. Basically, the goal for this initiative is to interact with owners of vehicle that would be leaving their vehicle idling without anybody around, unsupervised. So the approach is really an education approach, is to drive around, locate those vehicles, try to locate the owner of the vehicle, and discuss with them alternatives, such as having a remote start, not to leave the vehicle unattended, not to leave keys in the vehicle, remove any valuables for vehicles. So we're going to be doing this for a week. As an education session. And personally, I think that this is something that we should be doing on a more regular basis, especially looking at the statistics that we saw a little bit earlier when the theft of motor vehicle is a little high in Edson, something that we can certainly utilize in an education portion for a future priority if we choose to do so. Then we did two public consultation, upcoming. So there will be two public consultation in February, March for the 2022-2023 policing priorities. Planning to do one in Edson. I just don't have times right, the date and times right now. For the county, it's online and it's on this week and next week. So the residents of the county can start commenting on the priorities that they would like to see for the upcoming year. We will be receiving, I hope soon, new decals for our police cars. I don't know if you ever noticed, but the provincial police cars have on the side of the police car the word saying proudly serving Albertans or proudly serving Alberta. Well, we will be able to have for the Edson cars proudly serving Edson. I'm actually looking forward to this. I think it's great that we will be able to put on their police card that we are your police service and that we're proud of doing it, and that people can hopefully recognize themselves in our police car. New initiatives that we will be doing that we slowly started with COP is monitoring speed areas. So we provided COP with a radar gun and asked them to monitor some areas that are more problematic than others in terms of speeding. Basically having them sit in a certain location and calculate the numbers of vehicles that are coming through, the speed that they're going, and then bringing the statistics back to us so then it can help us decide where we should focus our traffic enforcement in the community. Last and not least, we need to continue to work with the community. And I need to continue, and our members need to continue to promote this message is to participate in the judicial system process. What I mean by participating in the judicial system process is, first of all, if you are suspecting that something suspicious is happening, criminal activity is happening, please call the police. We need your phone call. We need the statistics. We need to know what's going on in the community. When that is done, then if there's more involvement that is required, please continue to stay with us. What I'm saying by this is if you've been victimized, we would like to encourage people to provide statements, participate in the evidence gathering that we need to build our file and build cases against criminals that are, causing some problems in our community. And then when it's time to go to court, to be able to still to rely on those people to be witnesses for us. We have victim services here that will help anybody that has to go to court. We'll prepare them, explain them how it works and whatnot, so we can be successful and at the end of the day get justice for what's happening. So really important participating in the judicial system process. Someone reporting offenses, and if you're victimized, participating with us through statements, through testimony, and being engaged. And would like to take the last 2 seconds to take a moment to recognize the hard work done by the men and women of the Edson Rcmp in 2021. The statistics that I just presented, in my opinion, are very good. We were able to reduce the crime stats in every categories, and that was done through the hard work from the regular members, our front support counter, victim services, our guards and matron, and I'm very proud to be part of this team. And 2021 shows that everybody worked hard despite a pandemic that we're still fighting today. So thank you very much, and if there's any questions, we'll be pleased to answer them.
And I know the community appreciated you standing up and answering the concerns that they had. So we do have some questions from council here this evening. So we'll start with Councilor Pisichny. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the mayor to Staff Sergeant. One question I have is, what is SCAN?
And you know what? I will have to Google it, but basically SCAN, I don't know the exact words for the letters, but it's a provincial organization that is available for the public to contact, and they basically will work with the population at targeting houses that are causing nuisance in communities. I'm sorry, I don't know what the acronym stands for, but they're basically the people that you want to reach when you have, for example, a flop house beside your residence, or a suspected drug house where there's a lot of activities, where there's some nuisance, where sometimes the police, their hands are tied because there's no obvious criminal activities happening in the open, out in the open, but there's sufficient nuisance happening that they can then enforce some regulations where they deem the property not suitable for the neighborhood. So that's basically what they're for. Again, my apologies. I would have to Google the actual acronym for the definition of the SCAN.
Staff Sergeant, I believe it's Safer Communities and Neighborhoods.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I know what they are. I just did not know the acronym. Thank you very much.
All right. Do you have a follow-up, Councilor Pisichny, or you good?
No, I think they answered it. So
Okay, thank you. Councilor Chenard.
Through the mayor to Staff Sergeant, if I heard you right, when you said the response time average is 12 minutes, Edson is 10, but half that time is the public reporting, taking the file. If I'm correct, that's what I heard. So what can we encourage the public to do? So of course, when they need your assistance, there's panic and stuff because you call me Rcmp, but what could we educate the people to do to make the report faster? That way you can get a faster response time.
So what I meant by it's the administration of the file. So the public really does not have anything to do with that piece. It's the administrative side of our dispatchers that I'm talking about here. So it's the time for them to basically take the call, talk to the person, get their name, phone numbers, create a file, forward that to the dispatcher. This is the time that I'm referring to, that 4.5 to 6.5 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councilor Moore.
Through the mayor to Staff Sergeant Delisle. The break and enter is much lower, as you mentioned. How much would you attribute that to citizens taking into account and installing better security methods such as doorbell cameras and better lighting on their properties?
So it will definitely have an impact. Anytime we make it more difficult for criminals to commit a crime, it's a plus for us. Now, it's hard for me to be able to tell how much such initiative had an impact on the number, but if you are aware that in a certain neighborhood, there was an increase in installing cameras, more lighting and whatnot, it's proven that it does have an impact. Unfortunately, I just don't have any numbers, but I've heard it over and over, having lights that are automatic when there's movements in back alleys will reduce some traffic in back alleys and things like this. So I just wouldn't be able to say the percentage it had, like the effect that it had on the numbers that I presented today.
Thank you, Councillor Byer, and then Councillor Taylor.
Thanks. This question is through the mayor to Staff Sergeant Delisle. In your report, you said that you did a warrant roundup with 30 people arrested on 50 warrants. So fantastic job on that. So how many of those end up going to jail?
Not a lot, unfortunately. A warrant roundup like this, it's basically, I hate to say it, but there's a bit of a catch and release that happens. The benefit of doing it is to remind people that are warrant that we are out there looking for them, and hopefully by catching them, some of them went back to court and addressed the fact that they have charges before the court. I do have to say that out of the 30 people, I'm not sure that 10% went to jail. We basically released everybody back with a new court date. I know one person out of that group that was arrested. It was the 5th time that we were doing that catch and release with them for the same thing, not just going to court.
All right, thank you, Councillor Taylor, and then Councillor Chouinard.
Through the mayor to Staff Sergeant Delisle, first off, thank you for the presentation and all the hard work you and your members have been doing. I think prior to you joining Edson or coming to the detachment here, we did have a lone RCMP liaison that worked directly with the schools. And I know currently we have sort of one member maybe assigned to a school. You alluded to that in your presentation. Would you see a greater benefit to going back to the system of having a lone RCMP officer who's, whether it's part of their position or their sole position, to work directly with the schools as a liaison?
Definitely. I've worked in detachment where there were dedicated school liaison officers. To have one person that only does that day in, day out dramatically increased the relationship between the school, the students, and the RCMP. Absolutely. The flip side of this is then I would have to take one of my officers that are currently responding to calls to do this. So that's a decision that we would have to make as a police service with council. Is this something that we want? But if to answer your questions, there is an increased relationship created, absolutely. The other factor to consider is you have to have someone that wants to do that. A good school liaison, it's someone that wants to be dedicated into that job. To assign someone to this that don't see this as a career goal can be sometimes challenging, but those are things that can be worked around if that's something we would like to see in the future. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Chouinard.
Through the mayor to Staff Sergeant, follow up to Councillor Byer's question. I'm very familiar with catch and release, but is there any stats information we can gather? Because as far as I can see, it is RCMP doing your job, but it's a total waste of time. But if we can take those stats, send it to the justice minister and put more crackdown, because you're right, some of these people are arrested 5 times, they don't care, they know getting slapped on the wrist. But is there some way we can send the stats and let the minister know, or whoever the justice know, that these criminals are repeat offenders? Catching release doesn't do any good. It's taken up a lot of our valuable time to do catch and release.
A very good question. And yes, it would be, as you were asking the question, I was trying to think like how we could capture those stats or which one would be relevant. So one of the I'll use the word problem, but one of the issue that we have with failing to appear is it falls under the, so because of the principle in Canada that everybody is innocent until proven guilty. So now the fact that they did not go to court and we issued a warrant is like the first step in the process. They haven't been found guilty of that yet. So we have to be careful on how we present those stats, on what we provide. So it's a bit more complicated than it looks like. And I agree with you, would be interesting to see. I am currently working with the local newspaper and to present on a regular basis, basically weekly, the numbers of people that fail to appear in court. But one of the barriers that I have is I can only mention the one that are for a person crime for a safety reason. For the reason that I mentioned earlier, the fact that everybody's innocent until proven guilty. So I cannot just name everybody, but we could certainly calculate every week how many people did not attend court. That would be possible. I could probably get a number. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, anybody else have any questions? Councillor Bevan and then Councillor Moore.
Through the chair to Staff Sergeant there. I see your fraud has stayed up there from 2017 all the way through. Does that include scamming? Like you hear a lot about the scamming going on between of seniors and other people in that. Where does that fall in there?
Yes, so absolutely. So the frauds, so if I look at the statistics here, so yes, we saw a decrease of 3%. Yeah, it's almost the same level. So we went from 75 to 73. So yeah, that's almost the same number. So it does. And that's usually the majority of calls that we get are frauds that are happening that way. Someone got tricked over the phone or through an email and forwarded some money or cards or whatnot. That would be falling in there. Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Moore.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Bevan read my mind.
All right, thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Through the Mayor, Staff Sergeant Delisle, seeing your list of upcoming initiatives, and you're here tonight speaking with council, I'll ask you, what would you like to see council do, and what can council do to assist you either with these initiatives or other parties you might have this year? We're going to be doing our strategic planning soon. Wondering if there's anything that you need from council.
So the one piece that will probably be very useful for us will be once we've set our priorities, if there's any education component to it, is being able to use the town website to advertise, what we're working on, some initiatives, tricks, ideas to prevent crime and whatnot. That would probably be the best thing that I can think of right now. It really depends on the priorities that we will decide. There might be some that council could be more involved in than others, but top of my head right now would be certainly the education piece through your website to reach as many people as possible. That would be that'd be the one that I can think of.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Bevan.
Through the chair to Staff Sergeant there. I see that you guys are going to start testing out body cams. Are
Yes.
your detachment looking forward to using them if you can get them at all?
So good question. I have not asked the members. I know we're not one of the pilot project detachment. I'll give you my personal opinion. People are filming us anyway. Everywhere we go, there's someone with a cell phone and we end up on YouTube. So why don't we have our version of it? And then we can show our version when something happens. So I have no problem with it. We have nothing to hide. So yes, bring it on. It will create maybe a little challenge when it comes down to storage and how to, administer the cameras and whatnot. But in terms of tools, I think that they're great tools.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I haven't asked a question yet. Staff Sergeant Delisle, just a question on the GIS unit. I know that we have a GIS unit that takes some resources away from officers responding to calls. Is that GIS unit active, and do you have anything that you can share with us? Obviously, it's a very sensitive work that they do.
Yes, so recently GIS has been involved in oil field theft. They were successful at locating a well-known offender in that area, and to basically do some surveillance, arrest the gentleman, do a search warrant at his residence. Items were seized. So we have this gentleman that was caught and will be facing charges in court. They have assisted on multiple warrants this year on different files. Top of my head, I'm thinking of a child exploitation one that happened in the county. Other files here in town with different type of crimes. They are currently working on 2 projects that I just cannot talk about publicly because I might tip my hand, but that will be happening here in town. Looking forward to share the results with you.
All right, thank you. And just to follow up, and it's kind of to the point of the catch and release system, and you know, as we are aware, we're having a lot of discussions about a provincial police force and you know, what the results of that are going to be. But are you facing a lot of prolific offenders and repeat offenders that you're finding as you're responding to things such as break and enters and thefts from vehicles?
Yes, we do deal with the same people on a regular basis. Recently on just your regular average theft. So one person has kind of been identified as a prolific offender with stealing trucks. So he will be seeing a little bit more of us in the near future. Yes, we do.
All right, thank you. Any other further questions or comments? All right, well, with that, thank you very much for taking the time, Staff Sergeant Delisle, and we look forward to seeing you at Strat Planning as well. And once again, thank you to your members for their service to our community. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
All right, we have no reading of bylaws. Reports from administration, appointment of licensed inspector under bylaw number 2030. Can I get a motion, please, that council appoint the general manager of infrastructure and planning and the economic development officer as licensed inspectors to carry out the duties and responsibilities under bylaw number 2030, the business license bylaw. Councillor Kosichny will make that motion, and I believe we have Ms. Florizone that's going to be presenting on this.
No, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Florizone was actually not in today's.
Okay. All right. So Mr. Kitlitz will present to us our General Manager of Infrastructure and Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No formal presentation. It's pretty much a housekeeping item. As council, I believe council is aware, we're transferring the business license function from the protective services unit to the essentially the economic development portfolio with support from planning and development services. So as the bylaw reads, the licensed inspectors need to be appointed by council. And so this is just an RFD asking council to appoint the soon to be filled, hopefully, economic development officer position. And then as a backup, the general manager for the time being to be the inspectors to administer this bylaw.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kitlitz. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carried. Can I get a motion, please? The revised snow and ice control policy OT3 as set out in attachment 3 of the February 1st, 2022 request for decision be approved. Councillor Bevan will make that motion, and Mr. Kitlitz, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the request for decision before council this evening contemplates some changes to the snow and ice control policy O-T-3. Specifically, council is being asked to support amendments to give the CAO the authority to draw from the snow reserve and make policy and/or operational decisions as necessary during extraordinary snow events. Staff research of snow and ice policies in other municipalities across Alberta has proven that providing the CAO some level of discretion is typical. And further to that, the proposed wording that is before council has been vetted through our legal counsel. The policy as written today has worked quite well over the past years during lighter winters and snow events when it comes to accumulation. However, the events of this season, resulting in high accumulation, back-to-back events coupled with temperatures that quite fluctuate by quite a bit to extreme cool to melting, has exposed the policy and safe operating procedures which is really the driver for the proposed amendments this evening. Also, given these challenges, staff has spent some time over the past 3 weeks gathering information from some other comparable municipalities and that are also doing what they're doing with respect to snow and ice control. Excuse me. So I'm just going to pull this up here and share my screen. Before I dive into the presentation with some of this information, I just wanted to put a caveat on it that this really isn't what I call a scientific analysis of these policies. Really what we've done is we've looked at some other policies and procedures, and we're just providing this information as some context and perspective for council compared to ours. Not meant to be a full-hearted deep dive analysis. One thing that's really clear, we should make really clear, is we didn't ask the comparators in this report whether their current policies or practices are actually working for them. We've simply just stated the state as it is today. In the end, we hope the information provided tonight provides some context and for meaningful discussion with that provides administration with some ideas of what's important from council's perspective, from a policy perspective, so that perhaps later this year, probably in Q2, we can bring back further amendments for consideration of this policy to council. Just so council's aware, Mr. Shine and Mr. Fisher are joining us through video conference, to assist me with any operational questions or historical questions that I probably won't have the answers to. So with that, I will briefly go through this presentation for council. First slide takes a look little look at our current state. The existing policy. Sorry. Technology. Excellent. Try again. Good now, yeah. Current state. So the existing policy was adopted by council in February 2020. And it was basically a consolidation of some existing policies that were brought forward to council at that time. There was a committee as a whole, a bunch of discussion occurred, and it resulted in this amended policy that's been in place today. A little bit of data on historical snow events. We don't have full sets of data on this, but we'll try to collect more for future. But at this point, we were able to collect some of it. 2019 was an 11 event season, cleared residential 4 times. 2020 was 5, residential was cleared twice, and 2021 was 8 events, and residential was cleared 2 times as well. Some of the average snow accumulation that was stored in our snow dumps, and this is done in seasons. So the operations crew work in seasons. We budget in calendar years, but they sort of work in seasons. So one note I'll make is in the presentation that was part of the council package, there was some errors on this particular slide with respect to the seasons. I did a copy and paste function and forgot to go back and change the numbers. So my apologies for that. So the seasons are between the Q4 of the previous year and Q1 of the calendar year. So for 2017 season, there was 2,700 cubic meters of snow collected. 2018 was 63,874. 2019 was 54. 2020 and 21 were pretty light years. In fact, staff tell me that most of the snow melted before the season was even over. So the snow was stored inside in the snow dump didn't even really last that long. It was so minimal. So very low light years. And then the current season, which we're in right now, as of, I think it was last week, before we finished, we're probably halfway through the residential. We had 63,000 cubic meters of snow stored already. So that'll have gone up quite a bit based on us completing the residential this past week. And obviously the season is yet to be over. So it's quite a substantial amount of snow that's been handled. Just in terms of some of the comparables, just wanted to find comparables. We're similar in size from a population perspective, as well as length, longer of the roadway that they're clearing. These are the ones we picked. We did have others, but we didn't have any luck collecting, as much data, so we just picked these ones for now. The town of Edson has 133 kilometers of roads, so these are fairly comparable in that respect. First one is White Court that we looked at. White Court has 5 priority areas. They only have 1 threshold. They don't change the threshold for priority areas. White Court, they do windrow to the curbs. They will remove snow if the accumulation gets too high and it impacts traffic safety. They make a judgment call on that. They will remove, but their first course of action is to clear to the curb lanes. They do have, in their policy, they do have a clause that talks about that if they do have gates in their graders, but if they do block in some private driveways, they will send crews around within the next 2 to 4 hours to come clean some of that snow if it accumulates. And they do have a clause that talks about lanes. So if they become impassable, they will tackle lanes. In terms of resources, they have 2 graders with gates, 2 medium-sized loaders, which have with a bucket, 2 buckets, 2 snow blowers, 2 tandem trucks, a sanding truck, backhoes that they use for parking lots. Their staff is fairly comparable to ours. Again, they have 1 shift during the day. They will use weekends if there's extreme events. They run their snow dump with inside forces, and they do contract trucks when needed.
Just 1 second, Mr. Kitlitz. When you reference lanes, just a point of clarification, you're talking back alleys?
Yeah, back alleys. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Cold Lake, bit bigger of a municipality, but again, 5 priority areas. Here's an example where the municipality has different thresholds for their priorities. Their downtown and their major arterials are 3 centimeter, and they remove in that particular priority area, remove snow. The rest of the priorities have different thresholds, and again, I believe they windrow to the curb. Then again, if it exceeds, the windows exceed a certain height and become a problem for traffic safety, they will. They have a policy statement that says return to priorities once accumulation reaches the thresholds. Much like ours. They also have a clause that talks about operating below -30. They may cease operations if the weather gets too cold. We experienced some of that this year with the cold snaps, and work was breaking down. It's quite hard to operate in some extreme cold. Cold Lake runs with 2 graders, 2 loaders. I believe they're probably good sized loaders. They have plow trucks as well, so they have tandem trucks that double as snow hauling, but also can plow as they're rolling around. They have snow blowers, 3 sanding trucks, similar 9 operators with 1 shift. Dumpster operator in-house, and again, they'll use contracted services for hauling when required. Under Devon, 3 priority areas. Their downtown being the first, 5 centimeter threshold. Arterials and collectors are second with a 5, and then they use a 3 meter snowpack for residential. So they don't pull it off on accumulation. It's once the pack reaches the threshold. Again, they'll windrow to curbs or the middle median. In some cases, again, they make a judgment call when those windrows get too big, they will remove them. They also have the cold weather clause. They operate with 1 grader, 1 loader, 2 backhoes, 2 sanding trucks with belly blades. Again, that helps with providing dual purpose. While their trucks are out sanding, they can throw a blade down and provide some level of clearing in that scenario. Again, 8 operators, single shift, no weekend work unless needed, and contract haul. So a lot of these are very similar. Lacombe, a little bit bigger of a city, 3 priority areas. Their P1 is an 8 centimeter threshold, which is sort of the major roads that connect their emergency services. And I believe they have a secondary highway, secondary primary highway that runs through town. P2 is their collectors and arterials with an 8 centimeter threshold, and the residential is 12. Again, snow clear to the curbs. They pick up when it gets too high. They have a clause that says they return to the P1 and P2 when the thresholds are met. They also have a clause that talks about staff going back to clear the driveways, any block driveways. So those are the only 2 that I think had that specific clause. This one. They declare the private lanes and driveways are responsibility of the landowner. And they also have this major snowfall clause that says, if there's a snowfall that's greater than 12 centimeters, it sort of depicts an extreme situation. And then they will sort of adjust their priorities to deal with that major snow event. And it's not far off their priorities, but they just do it a little bit differently from an operational perspective when it comes to major snow events. So they have that built right into their policy. I won't go through all the equipment, but it's very similar. Graders, snow blowers, they have some blades again on their trucks. Similar staff, complements. In Lacombe, they have 2 shifts, so they're able to run 4-man crew during the day, or 5-man crew during the day, and a 4-man crew at nights when needed. Otherwise, fairly similar. Mornville, pretty close compared to us in terms of population and lane kilometers. They have 4 priority routes. Their main roads have a 5 to 10 centimeter threshold. Our terrace collectors are 10 to 15, and their residentials are greater than 15 centimeters. Their residential identifies their lowest priority, and I think what it's trying to say there is it takes them 5 days to clear when they do residentials. Again, clear to the curbs and until traffic and safety is impacted. They also have the clause to return to priorities upon the thresholds being met. Again, very similar in terms of the equipment, 2 graders, snow plows, same number of operators, more or less. So all that stuff's fairly similar. I'll have a comparison table that I can show at the end here. When we look at the town of Edson, again, 5 priority areas, similar to most of the other municipalities we looked at. Our thresholds are all 5 centimeters. The P4 I call collectors here, that's our high traffic priority area that you'll see in the policy. We have the policy that says return to P1 and 2 when the community accumulation rates its threshold. We have some identified working hours with respect to clearing off those priority areas. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a clause that talks about the private driveways are not blocked. Those are moved where we can. That's our equipment list. One of the things that there's a point about this on a different slide, but most of the other municipalities have more blades on the ground than we do. We essentially have 1 grader, one blade that touches the ground. So, but similar shifts, similar to the number of staff. The one thing I'll note is it says here single 10-hour shifts. That's not typical. That's what we've been running since December because of our current situation. Typically, they're 8-hour shifts that they'll run 5 days a week. So this table I just went through and did a bit of a comparison in terms of some of the key things in the policy, threshold accumulation, snowpack, whether they clear or remove. We're the only one that outright removes right off the bat by the looks of it. Most of them will clear for the first and then remove when needed, other than some of their priority 1 areas. All but 1 do lanes. No one does lanes except for 1. The WN just means when needed. That's what the WN refers to in the table. Some have the cold temperature clause, some don't, and some have the restart clause. So just a bit of a comparison table. Overall, generally, from what we observed or what we found is our staff complements generally pretty comparable to the other municipalities. Again, other than the fact that we have less blades on the road, fairly comparable there. From the financial stuff, we did collect some financial data from some of the municipalities, but not all of them, so we didn't display any of it. We're going to work to try to get a bit more of that data to compare to later on when we bring this back in the spring. But for now, we look to be fairly on par with material costs, a little bit less than our contract assistance and overall cost to operate. But that's really a first blush look. Not prepared to stand on a podium for that at this point. So one of the things that need to be considered, we do have a contract with actually it's Ledcorp, who has a contract with Alberta Transportation to remove windrows from the highways for 3rd and 4th Avenue. Start to get to learn those. Second and 3rd? No, second and 4th. Second and 4th, way off. 2nd and 4th. So that is in place. We're under contract. We do get paid for that service, and it's a service due once a year. which crews are starting tonight, I believe, at night. It's a night shift that we have to accommodate that, but just for safety reasons, less traffic on the highways. To get that work done. That takes about, I think, 3 days or so to do, in most cases, 3 nights. We also have trails, sidewalks, the cemetery, landfill, the parking lots. So these are all other areas that are needed to be done during snow events that aren't necessarily specifically addressed in our policy, but they do have demand. So for example, during these major events, we were getting requests to some of the parking lots weren't getting done in a timely manner, and we were kind of in a pickle, and we'd have to pull operators off the road crew to tackle that. So this is something that we have to have a little bit more fruitful thought on organizationally to try to prioritize where they should go. Maybe they need to be a part of our amended policy so that it's clear where they all fall in the pecking order. We also lease some of our buildings, the medical center being one where within that lease agreement, we're obligated to clear the snow in that area, in that parking lot. So we're contractually obligated to do that. So how do we manage that in terms of our priorities? Is contracting that out an option? Rear lanes, as we've talked about, alleyways, not in our priorities at all, not identified as the service we provide. One of the municipalities does do it on a regular basis, the rest are as needed, so that's something we might want to talk about. As council, I believe, is aware, we did make a call to get them tidied up here this past week just because of the sheer condition they were in and the complaints we were getting with respect to the rear lanes. At present, we have multiple snow dumps. We have the one in the east that's sort of, I think, a temporary one. From what I understand, our approved for that one ends after this season. We could certainly pursue getting an extension on that, but as of right now, it ends at the end of this year. So we just have the one major, the one by the airport. Take it or leave it. I know that, like I mentioned earlier, most of the municipalities we looked at this time around are clearing snow to the curbs. We have a little service level that picks it up. Some of the pros and cons of that for snow clearing, roads are clear faster when we just push it to the side. Obviously, get a quicker clean path on the roads. Typically, fewer resources because you're not using all those trucks to haul. And a lower immediate cost. It's probably cheaper to do that immediate. Some of the cons, there's probably a bit more load of work. I know we have a gate. I know that's probably something that's been asked. Our grader does have a gate that is in modification right now, waiting for parts and a severe modification to make it function better than it has in the past. But even with that, there's some handling to clear driveways. One of the things that the next two are pretty important, at least in the context of the town of Edson, from what I understand. The more snow we have on the curb lanes, the more issues we have with spring runoff and drainage. So one of the motivations to taking as much as we can away is to help with that, mitigate those concerns in the spring. Our storm system does need work for sure. We're aware of that. There's some issues there. And then it's just the damage to our infrastructure. The more water we have sitting on our roads, the more damage it does to those roads in terms of their base. So some of the motivation for taking that snow away is to protect that infrastructure for as long as possible. And that's where the long-term costs come into play. Taking it away, obviously, there's no permanent windrows. We're clearing that snow, getting it in the dump. Less impact on oncoming traffic. We only handle the snow once. One of the issues, if we do windrow it to the curbs, if there is a decision to pick it up later, we have to pull it away from the curbs in order to get the snow blower. So we're handling that snow twice. There's a bit of that cost there. As I mentioned in the cons for the clearing, there's those flooding concerns and the rest of the infrastructure. The cons are obviously it's probably a bit slower. It takes a bit longer for the equipment to leave certain areas. And in certain cases it may stress our snow dump capacity. The higher immediate costs on true events are what we're experiencing. So those are some of the pros and cons we've shared with respect to clearing. Obviously, some of the other things that we've observed through the process and administering the policy. One of the things that staff talked about is right now we try to pick up the windrows as quickly as possible. We don't let the grader get too far ahead of the blowers and the trucks, so that it can be picked up by the end of the shift. We haven't cleared intersections in all cases. We're starting to do a little bit more of that now just because of the volume of snow. So some of the things that can be considered is leaving the snow in the middle of the lanes for a while, picking it up as we get there. Obviously clearing the intersections to do that. My observations are we have very wide road carriageways in our town. Like a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of the roads are quite wide. And having a window down the middle doesn't really impact traffic that badly when it's the moderate size. So that's something to be considered. Obviously a hybrid where we could windrow some and pick up some. That's being done right now. There is situations where staff that are running the grader recognize that there's a stretch with no driveways where they can windrow it. So there's some areas where that's being done. And the priority 2 is all clearing, right? There's no picking up in the priority 2 area or zone. Equipment, obviously council's aware that snow blowers did experience quite a few breakdowns over this season with the large amount of snow. Large snow blower would be helpful, perhaps a second grader. As mentioned, a lot of the other municipalities we looked at had more blades, right? Belly blades underneath their sanding trucks so that they could provide a bit of clearing while they're sanding. So that's something we considered. The other thing is our sanding service. And Sam they have to weigh in on this, but right now our sand is dry. It's a dry material. It's sand with a little bit of salt mixed in, so it works for a little bit of traction, but it doesn't take away ice and it doesn't stick, right? So there's a process that you can get where you wet the material a little bit, so when it hits the ground, it freezes to the ground and it has a bit better staying power. So that's something that could be considered in the future if that was a goal. So that's most of the information we wanted to share. What we were hoping to, if the council has some questions or wants to have some discussion, just to get a feel for council's observations in terms of how the policy is being implemented, how it's working, what's important to council, speed of the program, the cost, adaptability, where the priorities should be. Are they still good or do they need to be adjusted? So at this point, we're here and open to discussion or any questions or thoughts council has.
All right, thank you. I know you said Mr. Fisher and Mr. Shine are on the line. I just want to check in with them to see if they have anything that they want to add from an operational point of view. I think that's really important to hear. They're dealing with this on the ground day to day. We just deal with the complaints. So Mr. Fisher or Mr. Shine, is there anything you want to add?
Thank you, Mayor Zahara. One of the things that I don't know if you're all aware, we were quite constrained with just how much snow fell, and then when it got really cold, with keeping all of our equipment operational, and that was quite a challenge for us over the sort of Christmas holidays. And our staff were working as hard as they could when they had equipment. And one of the things that operationally was a bit of a challenge was our level of contracted services that we plan around with our budgeting process doesn't leave us with a lot of room for dealing with those breakdowns when they happen without having to kind of go over our allowance that exists in the policy. So making some changes to give our CAO an opportunity to draw from the reserves is very helpful, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Shine, do you want to add anything?
Sure. Yeah. Also, there's the challenges we have with labour and the hours that they work. So obviously, if we work weekends and we work evenings during residential stretches, and then all of a sudden we have a snow event where we have to get out and work the priority roads for our safety, public safety issues. They're already burnt out or they're already timing out on their hours. So they're unavailable to go. So the idea behind not working weekends in residential zones or non-critical zones is that the staff are able to respond to the more urgent events that happen after hours. So it's worth considering that too.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shine. We'll open the floor to questions. Councillor Schnarr.
Through the chair to all of you people on the team. Virtually, you've answered all my questions. Equipment was an issue. Your event, like 5 centimeters to me is a joke. We need to go to 20 centimeters. You've addressed the equipment. I like what the other ones, plowing to the curb. Just one suggestion on that other one. When you plow the snow when it's fresh, even if you plow it to the curb, you move it again. Fresh snow moves easier than hard packed. I do appreciate the fact that we did hit extreme cold to extreme warm. That caused everyone complications. So I guess if you're looking for us to, for myself personally, I like your recommendations. So whatever we got to do to change, everything I'm hearing, you guys have figured it out, and we need to change it to address your issues. Good job.
All right, thank you, Councillor Schnarr. Councillor Pisichny.
Yeah, to the mayor through to administration. Snow removal is one of those things that our residents touch and feel. It's something they drive on. And if anybody thinks what we just did in the last 2 months was successful, I will challenge them on it. It's a tedious, very slow process. To me, in the policy, 5 centimeters, that's 2 inches. That's to me not a snow event. I think the best comparison you have in there is Whitecourt. Whitecourt is in the same snow belt as Edson. 10 centimeters is a snow event. That's 4 inches. Soft snow moves to the side real quickly. Windrows are always a challenge. Kids don't mind windrows. Push them on their driveway. They don't care. I think a clearing process has to be done and only focus on removal once or twice a year, except for in the areas where you absolutely cannot avoid it. But to me, you can't tell me that this community wasn't lit up over our snow concerns. And it was so long in the process. And then there was nothing put to the side. We have 3 inches of ice and we have rows of ice everywhere in this community, and the roads are rougher than rough. So normally in the winter, you get a break from our potholes and you get to drive on some frozen stuff. Right now, it's worse than I've ever seen it. I don't know why that policy was created a while ago. I wasn't a part of that, but it needs to, the old system seemed to work good. They needed some tweaking. I like the idea of the comments from operational observations. Windrows in the middle of the road. I know in my neighborhood, the windrow in the middle, I just got to go one direction. I can leave my house in, and it's cleared, and the gutters are cleared, and so some changes got to happen. And I don't think building another snow dump to accommodate removal every time would be a smart move. So to me, we got to get back to like every other community that you just did a comparison where you splayed it to the side, and then we pick it up in the spring along with the dirt to make our roads a little bit cleaner. So I welcome the changes. I think it's crazy that we have to put back in this policy that our CAO can't make those decisions. So I wholeheartedly support everything and the changes. I'd like to see some more improvements on it. But the only thing that I would like to see that in the recommendation so far is that 5 centimeters removed, at least make it a 10 centimeter rule. Because really it's not even 2 inches, it's 1.96 inches. So we're talking that much is not a snow event in Edson. That's a snow event in Toronto. That's a major snow event. But in Edson, we get snow. And if you went through all the histories, and I mean, by nowhere nearly as old as Councillor Bevan, but I've been here. I've been here my whole life, and we've always got lots of snow. We luck out like we did the other year where you don't get snow, but Edson, it never comes in 2 or 3 centimeters. It comes in waltz, and then it'll disappear. So I think a lot of our administration are new. And I think you realize that what we did this year wasn't a great idea. And I welcome the change because we need to revert back to some old processes. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor.
Through the mayor to administration, thank you for the presentation and thank you for bringing this before us. I won't lie, this was a hot topic, as Councillor Pisichny has said. I certainly, look at your presentation and you have the word adaptability. And I think what we saw this year is just the first of what we're going to see in multiple years to come, along with climate change. And you're going to see extreme weather changes. very quickly throughout the year. And we've seen it in summer, we'll see it in the winter. So whatever policy is created, it needs to be adaptable. And it needs to be able to not be sewn into certain wording, but we can't go change the policy. It has to be open to, yes, the CAO is going to have to say, nope, we're changing things due to an extreme change in temperature. I've been asked by lots of residents to ask lots of different questions, some of which you've already addressed. That, you know, the big question of pushing off to the side, whether the removing. And I think, you know, in terms of the speed scenario, I think pushing off to the side is fine. My question though is, in other municipalities you've worked in and other things you've talked about, damage to infrastructure, sewage system, those types of things, we do have an aging infrastructure here. And that's something that does concern me. If we do end up pushing off to the side, can it handle it? And that's perhaps, if we are going to go that route, with the amount of snow that we just had, which may not be, you could see one off, but it may not be. You know, that's a question. I don't know if I'm asking that question, or it's a rhetorical question or something to think about. And that's the biggest thing that concerns me, right? And I guess changing gears to the policy itself. Yeah, yes. In terms of, if I
Go ahead.
In terms of it under extraordinary weather conditions, you took out the part where it says, and you basically crossed out, hazardous conditions exist posing a threat to public safety control which exceed budgetary. I would still like to keep the hazardous conditions exist pose a threat to public safety. I guess if you're changing it, yes, there's an allusion to it. But if the CAO and staff believe there is a hazardous, then that's the line you use. You can still keep everything else in terms of the 30 centimeters. In fact, you know, again, you budgeted or you checked this through legal, and again, you would have to check the statement that I have. You could change it to weather patterns that, in the sole opinion of the CAO, may exceed snowfall accumulation exceeding 30 centimeters in depth, also extreme conditions, i.e. freezing rain, and hazardous conditions that may pose a threat to public safety. I think if you have something along that you've listed sort of 3 criteria that you could use, and it's an and/or scenario. It's not you need all 3, it's at least one of those is what you need. Essentially, by doing that, we give the CAO a blank check in terms of you hit one of those criteria, you know, in your opinion, your professional opinion, to go ahead and do that. I'd like to see something in that. Again, like the hazardous conditions pose a threat to public safety. That would be number 1 in terms of that. I guess the other 2 allude to that, but you don't say it specifically. So that's my comment there, and I'll have more comments after others speak. So.
All right, thank you, Councillor Pisichny.
Through the mayor to Councillor Taylor. Does it not cover that under item 6 where they added in extraordinary conditions? That was redlined. Because you're asking for the definitions to be changed, but they actually identify that under in extraordinary weather conditions or emergency situations, CAO has the authority to release funds required from the designated snow removal reserve. That gives them the authority. Yeah. And you're just at, because all they're doing is they're just defining what an extraordinary weather condition is.
CO Beverage.
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Taylor. The adjustments when it comes to extraordinary weather conditions, there has been a Supreme Court of Canada case that has changed, is going to have impact with regards to policies. And if anyone is attending the legal session on Friday or the upcoming one also with the armor.
It's Thursday.
Thursday.
The snow one, yes.
Okay, my apologies. Anyway, there are, it was recommended to put that particular wording for this point in time. The recommendation for this policy to allow for further flexibility is to reduce the liability in essence for the person making the decision, I suppose, even though the MGA does allow for flexibility in that way. It's just that there's been some new case law that is directing and has raised the attention to our legal team. So this is what their best approach to our concurrent policy, knowing that we're bringing the fulsome review back to you. This was the best option to take at this moment in time.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byer.
Thank you. Through the chair to administration, I appreciate the report, and I am pleased to see that we have some extraordinary weather events considered in this kind of revised policy that you presented. One thing that I was kind of questioning was the ice control, and you're talking about sanding in the presentation part, and then the ice control in the policy portion. Just if maybe a definition of that when it comes back can be included. I'm fine not having it at the moment, just to kind of define what that means. I know we do have sand often spread. I believe I saw somewhere in here that if there was more than 10 centimeters of snowpack, I can't find it now, that sanding was not essential or wouldn't work, which sorry, I can't find it again, but I found it earlier. That sanding or ice control was not feasible to happen when it's when you have a large snowpack, and I definitely maybe disagree with that, and also that especially this year it's been essential in some areas. And Councillor Taylor mentioned the portion about the infrastructure, and my question was, with the damage to the infrastructure, if we don't do the snow removal, is that every single road, or is that just certain areas of town, or is that just certain areas where storm sewer drains are having issues? Because obviously we don't want to encourage any problems to get any worse than they already are, where they change in our priority levels as far as our roads go. And also in the presentation portion, you're mentioning about the trails and the library. So I was under the impression that the park staff did some of those items. I didn't realize the roads crew were doing them. Maybe you're mentioning them intermingled in here and I'm just not understanding that. So it was, sorry, I'm just trying to find it again. Park staff, nope. Snow clearing, oh, there we go. Yeah, the trail, sidewalk, cemetery, landfill, and parking lot. So I'm not sure who kind of was designated for that, but I was under the impression that the parks crew did all the trails in the winter time, since they didn't have grass to mow, I guess. I do agree with Councillor positioning. I think if some areas that we can do a little bit more windrowing, that's possible. I thought that policy already had that in here, but I guess it maybe isn't enough. But I certainly look forward to it coming back in a few months. And I do support the redlined, the policy that's been revised, presented tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kitlitz or Mr. Fisher. Do you want to speak to who's clearing what? Because I know that you guys have made some changes recently.
Mr. Mayor, through you, I'll answer the clearing one, and I'll let Mr. Fisher talk about the storm sewer infrastructure one. So in terms of the clearing, you're right, Councillor Byer, the Parks crew does have some of those priorities on their list, but I think what we kind of observed this year was when the transportation guys were under pressure, we needed some help. And then the question is, what's a priority? Where should we take staff away from to do roads? Is trails a higher priority than a car parking lot, or the parking lot higher priority than a sidewalk? So I think that's really what's in question. Absolutely, the parks crew are doing their job, and they're helping, and they're doing their work. But I think when we think about what's the priority, I think if we were to bring it back, we might bring back a policy that includes all those things in the list, so we can determine where they're at the priority. And then for us, it's just about deploying the staff to the right priorities, right? So I think that's what it was more about. So hopefully that answers your question.
Mr. Fisher, you want to speak to the storm sewer question?
I'm muted. Through the mayor to Councillor Byer's question about the storm infrastructure. The biggest issue is that it is freezing off. So as we deal with the melt, things are plugged off and we have flooding concerns that occur during the snow melt. And we're already spending a significant amount of time with our crews during those periods of time to keep things thawed. We have to go out and steam culverts and steam catch basins to keep the highway drainage working and other areas working. And having to remove snow at the same time would be onerous, I think, is the primary concern. Sam, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think you got it right then.
Sorry, what was that, Sam?
No, Pat hit it accurately on the head there.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you. Anybody else? Any questions, comments? Councillor Bevan.
To the chair, thank you, Councillor Pacishny.
Senior moment.
I can say that in the past, I noticed that parks used to have 6 to 8 employees employed. Now I think they're down to 5, so which puts them under a little bit of a strain. Never did fill that one position there, I don't believe. Public Works used to have 8 to 15 people out there at one time, and we did get our snow removed very efficiently in the past year. And that I do like the idea of having a second grader so that if they have to do the priority routes, that grader can do the priority routes. We don't have to get away from our residential places. That another grader can go up and do. They keep doing that, and if they leave the windrow there, we come back and pick it up 3 or 4 days later, which is no big deal on that. But I think, the 5 centimeter, I agree with Councilor Position, we used to go to 10 or 15 because that's not a lot. I look at around our town, and I know that if there's a fire truck ever had to get, say, out to Hillendale or out to Glenwood at a time and that, or ambulance, they would have one heck of a time trying to get out there for sure. And we could maybe lose some homes or a residence or something like this. So I mean, it's a safety concern also. So I think, we look at, we need more workers out there in our parks and also on our public works and that. I mean, I know we look at overtime and that, it may not be wanted or warranted, but you got to remember that when our arenas are closed down, whether it was COVID or the summertime and that, all the staff from there came down and worked with parks or public works and that. So they, not really a true thing of looking at overtime. So I think, we're kind of understaffed here, some of the stuff in that. And then maybe we don't have to put them out there 12, 14 hours a day. If we had the extra and an extra grader and a good blower to work, we could probably do it. And I have seen it where I think maybe Councilor Bershishny can help me. Did we have blazing on one of our belly blazing one of our trucks a couple of times? Pretty well.
Go ahead, Councilor Position.
Through the mayor to Councilor Bevan, we used to have a front blade on one of the sanding trucks, and it was primarily used in areas that didn't have curbs and gutters.
Yeah,
they could just blast the snow into the ditches. So
I thought we had a belly one too at one time.
no, I've seen those. I've seen those on the news.
Yeah.
They don't look like they're that effective, but
No.
that's just what I've seen. I've never driven on those streets. I've just only seen the news.
All right, anybody else?
You can go ahead.
Okay, without question, this season we've seen that this policy is not at all what our community wants, needs, or what we were actually trying to do when we adopted that policy. The whole idea, if you look back at the council conversation, was to have flexibility, and we've created exactly the opposite of that. I'm very thankful that we were able to make some adjustments and got things cleared. I think we did actually very well once we got kind of a handle of the situation, and that's thanks to our staff and our contractors. I know other communities are just starting the residentials right now. We're complete, but it was a horrific number of weeks. And I agree with what Councilor Pacifici said. 5 centimeters is not a high enough threshold. Going back to those priorities at that low level is, I think, quite frankly, irresponsible from a resource point of view and a financial point of view. I think a 10 centimeter threshold would be much more acceptable. I'm totally fine with windrowing. I would suggested on our priorities, those streets are wide enough. I lived on 48th, I lived on 6th. Windrowing to the middle, clearing those intersections and then having it ready for pickup when we have the resources would be fine. But I do think we do need to pick those up before the melt occurs or sooner. I'm not a big fan of windrowing to the sides. It creates all kinds of issues with people with mobility issues, things of that nature. In the residentials, I don't think we can get away from hauling snow right away just because the amount of on-street parking in those streets are much more narrower. But I think adaptability is really, really important. Every snow event season is different. When you have back-to-back snow events, that's where the problems start to occur and temperature fluctuations as we've seen this year. So having a policy that can deal with that. And when we have those big snow events where people are having a hard time getting around, I think the speed is more important than the quality of the removal. And I think that was the biggest concern this time around. You can drive in residential neighborhoods. Driving a 4x4 truck was difficult in some areas, never mind a car or an SUV. Personally, and this is just my thought, when I look at the commercial area, there's an area where I think contractors could be used to deal with that overnight. And that would free up our resources to focus on priorities and residentials. Contractors then wouldn't have to deal with driveways and things of that nature, and that can be done before people start heading into those commercial areas. And as Councillor Pacici pointed out, snow removal is the most tangible thing people see for their tax dollars. They don't see anything else, but they see the snow removals. When that doesn't occur in a way that they deem appropriate, they question what they're paying for. So the financial aspect of it, I'm not as concerned with because it's a priority for our residents and we need to deliver that service. And not everybody has the ability to park on the street as well. So while I'm not a big fan of clearing all alleyways, I think we do need to have some room in the policy when they become impassable or in areas where they don't have front driveway access and their garages are on a laneway, that we deal with those areas. Because I think it's a little bit unfair for us to ask people not to park on the street and they can't get into the back alleys or the back garages. So I think some thought needs to go around with that. For sure, to me, the streets and cars getting around is the most important. But we are also trying to create a walkable community. So I think our trails still need to be a part of that, just where they end up on that priority list. I think we have to figure out. To be honest, I did get complaints about trails not being cleared, but when I said, hey, we're focused on roads right now, there was some understanding with that to manage those resources appropriately. So I do want to thank your staff. I know that they're exhausted. And I think that's something we need to be concerned about as well, because when staff are tired, mistakes happen. We don't want to see anybody getting hurt. And we want to make sure that there's that balance there as well. So thank you for this. And I look forward to the revised policy. Councillor Richard.
Just a few comments. I'll agree with the mayor on that. We need to look at contractors and I would say priority 1. But then with snow events, because I originally said 20 and then Councillor Bishop said 15, so I'll go with 17. Councillor Bevan said his age, so we'll give him 16. But I think what we need to look at priority routes with contractors, the snow and what we're talking about sand, we got away from sand because of sand damaged roads. We're going to strictly sand, and I guess people have to learn. There is sand, but it doesn't stop you. Use common sense. Adela and I agree. The policy we adopted, part of that council, we are now finding errors, so we need to change it. The question about equipment. There's no use saying we have great or whatever it is, but I'd like to see a cost, because I agree with you all. We need to upgrade our snow blower. We have to look at it, and then I'm surprised that you called them Willies instead of loaders. They are still loaders. I looked on the list, 1 loader and 2 Willies, and I thought we got Jeeps, but they are loaders. But I'd like to see a cost, and I agree with what I'm hearing in Rome. Most people said they don't care, I'm paying taxes on my damn snow. So if snow costs money to do, and then what I'm hearing, I agree too, is whether we're plowing it to the center or the curb, it would speed things up if we could get out there where the snow is fresh, plow it somewhere, And I believe that it's already been echoed in the room. The reason we do pick up the snow even later in the year, if you come back in March, it gets rid of that sand and excess water. So that's it for mine. And I think, do you guys get enough information for us or no?
Councilor Pietrzyk.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'm just, we do a motion to approve this because they have some immediate revisions on there. I'm wondering if you'd accept the amendment motion, I'd move to amend that we change the snow event from 5 centimeters to 10 centimeters.
Who made that? Who moved that?
Councilor Bevan.
I did.
You accept a friendly amendment?
I will accept a friendly amendment.
I was just making a movement to amend, so
Okay.
you could just know how to do the friendly amendment.
Okay, so we have a motion to amend. All those in favor? Okay, so now the motion reads.
The motion will read the same, it's just we amended.
Point of order.
Go ahead, Councilor Byer.
Sorry, my hand was raised for a while there and I don't think you saw it. So I just had a few more comments I would like to add if that's all right. Something to.
Councilor Byer, we're not voting on the motion yet. I'm just asking
Okay.
for clarification what the new motion's going is now on the floor.
Okay,
Motion hasn't changed though.
The motion hasn't changed.
Just the policy.
I was just,
Yeah.
the motion was to. I moved to amend the policy is what I was, amendment to the motion, allowing for the amendment up to 5. So the policy would be the same with the amended portion being allowing, change it from
Okay.
5 to 10.
Thank you. Councilor Byer, go ahead.
thank you. So I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. I do agree. I think we need to see some more blades on the ground and some flexibility in a policy that would be brought back to us regarding the parking lots and the trails. I think there are some common sense things to note there, that some trails are likely heavier used than others, and the staff would likely be the best to make that judgment, as well as parking lots and surrounding events. I don't want to create a policy that is so much step by step must be followed that way when there are other things to consider with those parking lots and when events are happening, as well as events downtown. When we have our light up and other events that the community services department puts on, that there's just flexibility to allow those events to function with a little bit of greater ease. And although I'm comfortable with 10 centimeters, perhaps at that threshold or considering that, I think we do have to realize that not everybody drives a truck. I don't drive a truck. Not everybody has snow tires. And I have coworkers who drive Honda Civics that get stuck regularly leaving their roads. They live on a residential area going up a slight hill and they get to a stop sign and they can't go anymore. People have had to push them numerous times. So this isn't a one-time thing. This isn't this year, this is previous years as well. So I do think we have to consider those individuals that are low income and single parents as well, that if they can't get to work, they can't pay their bills either. So not everybody can afford a truck and can get, can just put it in 4x4 to get out of any of these situations. So we please keep those people in mind as well. And I am open to contractors in the policy going forward as well. That was all I wanted to add. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor.
Through the mayor to administration, just reiterate what Councilor Byer mentioned about blades. I'm in favor of budgeting and looking at more blades to allow some flexibility there. Mayor Zahara mentioned back alleys. In fact, that was perhaps the biggest concern I had from residents, is that they just were spinning their wheels in their back alleys. I used to live in a back alley. I know if we had this much snowfall driving my Pontiac Sunfire I had 15 years ago, it would have been a nightmare. So it has to be some flexibility for back alleys as well. The other issue that I see that I called back in November, very shortly after the major event, we had a big event on Main Street, and Main Street wasn't done prior to that event. And that was disheartening. Although someone did mention there was lots of community spirit as people were helping each other push out of the street. However, we need to be conscious of that when there are events, especially Main Street. I don't believe Main Street is priority 1. Am I correct?
Commercial, it's commercial,
It's
so it's
commercial.
3.
So, and is there a reason like why it's lumped in there? I guess that the question is
Historically, just to give time for the business owners to shovel, because they have no place to put their snow,
right.
to shovel it out on the street, so you don't want to do it immediately after the snow event, but also 3 or 4 days may be too long, so. And that's why I kind of suggest that'd be a great opportunity for a contractor where they can go, you know, the following evening and do that while our crews are working on all the other areas. Just food for thought.
And also, it may not be a bad idea to consult business owners on Main Street as to what they would see in terms of an ideal time frame for them to get their sidewalk shoveled and then the roads cleared. So, but again, I sort of reiterate, I guess, what other members of council. This has been a wild year in terms of weather, and I know that the town crew has worked incredibly hard. I do want to thank them for their work. You know, huge applause on social media when the job was done, and hopefully we're smoother sailing. But February usually brings some eye-opening weather. So thank you to administration.
All right, thank you. Just a further comment on the 2 things. So the other issue on the alley piece, and I guess this is where I'm really challenged. Many of the alleys were impassable, not a level of service we would normally provide. People are getting stuck, so other individuals go out, bring a bobcat out or something, start clearing, and then risk getting fined. I think that is, I understand it, but I also think it's kind of harsh for us to go out there and do that when people are just trying to get around. So that's why I think we need to look at this policy to include alleyways when they're in that type of condition, whether it's on a complaint basis. I don't know. I know that's not necessarily the ideal way of doing it from a policy perspective. And 2, on the equipment side, the one snow blower we have is an absolute joke, if I could say bluntly. I think they managed well with it. I think we do need to spend the money to get appropriate equipment. I think that was, from my observation anyway, and Sam, I'm sure you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that seemed to be a very big pinch point for us as we're trying to move through. And I think too, having a second grader on hand is an absolute must. If one goes down, at least we have a second one ready. As we know, our contractors aren't necessarily geared up for town snow clearing with their equipment, and we can't afford to have delays when we have major snow events like this. So I certainly would like to see some costing on that. All right, anything else? Administration, do you have enough information?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through the rest of council. We very much wanted to make sure that this was well thought out and that we weren't reactive in this situation when it comes to the policy. You know, we have spent many hours, the entire team, evaluating and talking about what possibilities we would bring forward, but recognizing that having some of the information and understanding that the municipalities that we were also reaching out with were also dealing with a major event at the same time, we wanted to make sure that we get this right, and the adjustments that are made will allow for the flexibility in order to allow us time, and you will see adjustments when it comes to future extraordinary events in this case. So I really appreciate the conversation and the points that council brought forward. We need to understand this council's priorities as well as the service levels that you're wish for council to, or for administration to bring forward. So I found that this to be very valuable for all of us. And when we bring this back, I do hope that we have we've hit the mark, and we'll make revisions if we haven't. So we'll be bringing that forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. You have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Zahara. Just for clarification of the process and the motion here as I draft the minutes, and I know this has been fleshed out to some extent by council already, so I apologize for that. But I just wanted to confirm that Councillor Pasishny's motion was a motion to amend the original motion to adjust the definition of snow event in the policy. such that we would now have a revised motion that would read that the revised snow and ice control policy OT3 as set out in attachment 3 of the February 1st, 2022 request for decision be approved with the additional amendment of the definition of snow event to read snowfall accumulation exceeding 10 centimeters in depth. I just wanted to clarify what council's intention was there because the vote moved fairly quickly.
Yes, that is the intent, and that would be the motion.
In that case, I can also display the updated motion here.
Okay. All right, I think everybody sees that there. So with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Councilor Meyer, motion carried. Thank you very much. We will move on to information items. We do have Police Officer Sergeant Jim Desatel with us. Can I get a motion, please, that council accept the annual enforcement services update for 2021 as information? Councilor Chouinard and Mr. Desatel, take it away.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
For some reason, I don't have video. There we go.
There we go.
Thank you, everybody. Hello, Mr. Mayor, councilors. Haven't seen you guys in a while. It's good to be back. So, Community Peace Officer update. So we refer to ourselves as CPOs. Just so everybody knows what the acronym stands for. It's up there on your screen. I'll also share that PowerPoint here with you. Everybody see what we're looking at here?
Yeah, we can see it, Jim. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, so in enforcement, we deal with our typical bylaw complaints. When we receive a call for service, it is predominantly a resident who is unhappy and who is in the midst of a bad day. Usually they're unhappy with a neighbor or a fellow resident and are embroiled in a concern over a community standards issue. Sometimes it's weeds, grass, garbage, a dog or cat complaint, or a traffic concern. We do our best to act promptly for these calls, but sometimes they get stacked, meaning we have to triage them in order of severity. This is partly due to volume of calls and staffing levels. At times, it is very difficult to be proactive with issues that we know are going to arise due to call volume. In order to address these concerns more promptly and strategically, we can always look at increasing our establishment. And this, we just finished talking about snow removal, and that was a huge thing for us to address. Alleys, streets, sidewalks, and otherwise. Okay, so for Edson, the Community Peace Officer unit strength, last year, 2021, we had one level 1 and one level 2 CPO. In September, our CPO level 1 left, and however, Michaela attained her level 1 CPO in August. So for 2 months, 2 and a bit, we had one CPO patrolling Edson. And then from November to December, I came back to work and we had one level 1 and one level 2. So essentially a peace officer is governed by the Alberta Peace Officer Act and regulations, essentially a bylaw officer with increased authorities and abilities to enforce provincial legislation. Peace officers in Alberta come in 2 types. As you can see from the screen there, there's level 1s and level 2s. Level 1s have enhanced authorities, and level 2 is more or less a traditional bylaw officer, and they deal with bylaw complaints. But by the end of this year, all CPOs are expected to transition to level 1. Tom Perry, who left in September, was the only CPO level 1 until August, as I mentioned earlier. And in August, Michaela received her level 1 appointment. With this came extra authorities and abilities for enforcement, essentially more provincial authorities, such as Traffic Safety Act, moving traffic, running radar, those types of things. And it's also important to know too that only a CPO level 1 can access registered owner information, which is something that is crucial to law enforcement. If you want to run a license plate or a driver's license, you need to be able to know who you're dealing with. Otherwise, there's a long, protracted process to determine who the owner is, and it takes a long time, a lot of extra hours. So something that we try and do is provide community safety through service. And there's a list there of sort of our top hits, what we enforce. We enforce local bylaws, provincial legislation, not all of them. We have a host of ones that we do have the authority to enforce. Some of those are traffic related. Those are the more visible things that we enforce. We also do internal department support. For example, during snow removal, we will assist with trying to move vehicles out of the way that are blocking snow removal operations. We also, rather my duties is, one of them is to supervise the municipal employees at the Rcmp detachment. It's not direct supervision so much as having a point of contact with the town and having a chain of command for them to process pay documents, leave documents, those kind of things. And Staff Sergeant Jalal and I kind of work on those things together. It's not exclusive to me, and I'm not stepping on his toes or anything, or at least he hasn't told me I am. And automated traffic enforcement is something that we look after. I'll be referring to that as ATE. And we've had, of course, photo laser enforcement in town since about 2006. And they provide a big amount of work, large amount of work in the town, and we see the effects of that, or at least I seem to. I'm sure you guys do too. So in a lot of other jurisdictions, you'll see community peace officers doing traffic operations like this gentleman in Strathcona County. They're incorporated into the traffic plan along with the Rcmp and the sheriffs and the whole gamut. It's sort of a tiered policing model. You have the Rcmp at the top, then you have the sheriffs, and then you have CPOs fall in there as well. So typically we deal with bylaws. We can enforce things such as the Provincial Trespass Act, the Gaming and Liquor Act, and cannabis as well. Traffic safety is a big one, like I mentioned. And a lot of that is contingent upon what council wants. So if council thinks that we should increase our responsibilities, we can always make application to the province and have that done. And that's consistent with the tiered policing model that the province has gone towards. So in some places, for example, peace officers can take on some of the mundane tasks that the Rcmp deal with. For example, found property, motor vehicle collisions, minor collisions, mind you. They're not going to go to serious ones where people are injured, but then just the fender benders. And of course, in a lot of these places, the CPOs are integrated into the detachment, and they have a place there, and the calls are dispatched through that system. As an example of what a level 1 CPO can do in just a matter of about 9 months, from January to September, we generated $24,554 in revenue. And it's not just the revenue that you can look at, but it's also the added safety that comes along with that. To have somebody dedicated to traffic, being out there, being visible, and stopping people who are stopping at stop signs, people who are speeding in playground zones, people who are essentially doing things that they aren't supposed to be doing. I think that's important, and it's all part of community safety and the bigger picture that we're trying to establish here. This is just a screenshot of what our calls for service are like. Example 2020, 1,268 calls for service. and in 2021, 1,813. Now, a lot of that has to do with the amount of resources that are available. We didn't always have 2 CPOs on in this past year, and but they're fairly consistent. So, for example, in 2019, our calls for service were 1,225. And again, for a lot of that year, we didn't have 2 CPOs either. So a lot of times we deal with stuff proactively, and if we see a loose dog, we'll apprehend it and generate a file. So the more people that are out there, a lot of times the more files we'll generate. And the same goes for traffic work. So if we're out on the road and we see a violator, we create a call for service because of the process for writing the ticket and for creating a court package or a court system is necessary for that as well. See, some of the calls are fairly broad. We don't get a lot of cannabis calls. We don't get, in 2021, we started getting face covering calls. So all relates to the bylaw and what's going on in the community at the time. Animal control is one of the big ones. Moving traffic is big. People are upset about speeds and school zones and playground zones. People are upset about loud mufflers. The good news is that because we have in Makila somebody who's able to address moving traffic complaints, we'll be able to tackle those a lot more efficiently now. This next slide, everybody's familiar with our speed signs that are mounted on poles in various areas. We, of course, have them near Vanier, Mary Bergeron, Holy Redeemer, by Parkland and Pine Grove. We have one in West Haven, Hillendale, Edson Drive, 63rd Street. We also have a mobile one that we kind of put in strategic places in various locations that we think would be good for people to observe what their speeds are. Unfortunately, I think in some cases it has an effect where they try to beat their high score. For example, if we look on 63rd Street, we can see there's a very high rate of speed in the summertime. In July, I believe, somebody was doing 160 down that hill, which is ridiculous and dangerous. So using this data, we will, of course, be strategic with it and incorporate it into our traffic plan. So along with this, of course, comes everyone's probably heard the new system coming out where it's administrative penalty system for traffic tickets. The government just recently pushed that off until summertime because they wanted to do more consultation, otherwise known as people complained about it. So that's coming down the pipe, and we're gearing up to be part of that with our systems and computers and e-ticketing and printers in the car and all that sort of stuff. So when you look at a typical police vehicle for use in traffic violations and writing tickets and stuff, our vehicles are starting to look like that as well. We have all that equipment. So this is a slide concerning automated traffic enforcement. And everybody sees these vehicles that are wrapped in yellow when they go to Edmonton. That will become the new provincial standard this year. And even in Edson, all the automated traffic enforcement vehicles will be wrapped in yellow at some point later this year. Something of interest in that, everybody kind of complains about getting a photo radar ticket when they come to Edson, but honestly, we don't get a lot of complaints overall. I mean, when you look at the thousands and thousands of tickets that are issued, we had a total of 14 complaints from people. So 3 people complained that the photo radar truck wasn't parked safely. One person complained they lost their ticket. One person complained that there's too many photo radar vehicles. Somebody complained that they got a ticket that wasn't theirs. and 8 people were angry that they got caught. When you look at the net revenue numbers for ATE over the past couple of years, you can see that it's fairly consistent, with the amount of revenue that's coming in. The only thing that fluctuates really is the hours of service. And in 2019, the contractor had some issues providing the service that was required. So what can we surmise from this? That people speed. It does improve the safety on the roads. We look at the collision statistics and things like that. We do see a decrease in that. However, it's almost a consistent amount every year. But bearing in mind the volume of traffic that comes through Edson is significant. Thousands and thousands of vehicles every day. The province is in the midst of doing a whole review of the automated traffic enforcement program. And we've been involved in a lot of discussions and information sessions on how that's going to work. So right now there are 20 traffic zones in Edson that are monitored by photo laser. And every one of those zones will be under review, and we will have to justify why we are using ATE in that zone. We'll almost have to put a business case together to support that, bearing in mind all kinds of factors from our traffic safety plan to complaints from citizens to collision statistics, things like that. And we're going to work together with our operator, Global Traffic, to make sure that that's done properly and that it's going to be acceptable to the province. And I got a picture of a Mountie here beside a beautiful lake. And of course, it's important to note that our revenue from traffic enforcement is reinvested into the community for safety initiatives. And the one that previous councils have chose is to help with the costs of the Rcmp contract. So it's not something that we're going around spending willy-nilly. It's actually being reinvested into the community. So for 2022, our plans are laid out here. As you know, we are in the midst of a playground zone transition. What's going to happen is all the school zones are going to be, for all intents and purposes, playground zones. And so the signage is going to be put out for that. We have a budget, and we will accomplish that probably hopefully by the summertime. We're hoping to receive some direction from council after your strategic sessions, and we will incorporate that into our plans for 22. We also cooperate quite frequently with other agencies, whether it's the Rcmp or the ATE provider, and we work with on different projects. One thing that we try and work on once in a while is addressing out-of-province violators. It's very difficult. Actually, it's non-existent right now that the AT provider doesn't have the ability to process tickets from out of province. So if we work with them and we pull them over roadside, then we can handle the ticketing. Otherwise, they just don't get off, sadly. Also, we deal quite frequently with the vulnerable population in Edson. A lot of times we're the first point of contact. So we're quite able and to deal with their needs and hopefully assist them in whatever way we can. Something that we're also addressing, three big areas. And I showed the graph earlier with the speeds in some of these zones, but just through congestion alone, and we're over in West Haven Drive, looking at moving people along that are stopped too long in areas they shouldn't be stopped, or parked, picking up children or dropping them off during school times, before school starts and when school ends. 63rd Street, Edson Drive. That's a big one for speeds when people are coming into town, or maybe they're trying to set a high score on the signs. I'm not sure, but that's an area we certainly want to focus on as well. 2 areas. And of course, with the schools and the new playground zone, school zone conversion, we're going to be focusing on that as well. And of course, I mentioned the automated traffic enforcement rules are changing, and we'll be heavily involved in that transition. And hopefully we keep the zones we have, but we might need to work on some of them and find the evidence to support them. So just in closing here, I'll wrap it up. One thing that we try and do in enforcement, and I know it was mentioned during the snow removal discussion, we're not going to go out there and hammer people with tickets because they're stuck in the snow, or we try and educate them. We try and be proactive, and we try and get compliance. Sort of the last thing we want to do is start handing out tickets if we can get compliance one of the other ways. That's about it. Open for questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Desautels, for your presentation. And our first question to Councillor Moore.
To the mayor, through to Mr. Desautels. Could you please explain what community standards is?
So the community standards bylaw is a bylaw that more or less governs everything from, if your yard's a mess, what's considered a mess, how long your grass should be before it's cut. So it's fairly lengthy, and it was revised here a couple of years ago. It's on our website if you want to pull it up for reference. I hope it just basically covers everything that's kind of a nuisance, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Councillor Byer.
Thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Desautels, thank you for the presentation. I had a couple of questions regarding the moving traffic locators there with the 100 and some km/h top speeds. I do recall at a previous strategic planning session, that there was a little bit more information on those details. Are those happening during the daytime or at night, or could they be like the one on Edson Drive? Like, could it be when people are coming over the hill there on the North Road heading south? Like, do they extend that far? And then also, I've got a couple of questions just piled into that same topic. The 750 moving traffic complaints, are they from those high speed, possibly those high speed calls, or do we get many calls where people are going Mach 3 down these roads? Because I certainly haven't heard of any complaints at those speeds that I've been aware about. And then do they have to be calibrated at a certain frequency, or I'm not really sure how they work, but just a few questions regarding those. Thanks.
Sure. We do have the data on an approximate time within an hour of when these are occurring. So we will be strategic in the future and look at these times and try and work a shift that will match when these events are happening. Bearing in mind, there's only two of us. There's only one of us that is certified to deal with moving traffic complaints. So we have to spread the resources as best as we can. As far as the other traffic question you had, they're calibrated for a distance, and it's purely, they only pick up at a certain distance, and they will read until they get close enough to the sign, and then it's not really something we would use for court. It's just more of a, hey, it's a reminder for the drivers, more or less, hey, you're speeding, you might want to slow down. We do have photo radar. So it's an education piece more than anything. We really can't use it for enforcement.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Councillor Taylor.
Through the mayor to administration, or Mr. Delisle, not Delisle, Desautels, sorry. You mentioned that the photo radar trucks will be eventually yellow in design. Is there an ETA or a time period It'll be this year, but do we have an estimated time in terms of when that's happening?
What I'm advised is that all this transitioning will be done by the end of the year, but there are specific timelines when various things need to be done in accordance with the new provincial regulations. I don't have the vehicle wrap one yet, but it's going to happen fairly soon, I think, because it's kind of an easy win for them to show that they've done something. Whereas the review of each traffic zone, I think we have a lot longer to deal with that because there's a lot more work involved.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Desatel, thank you very much for your presentation. Just a comment that I've received from residents. Really appreciate the presence in the school zones in the morning and the afternoons. Very high visibility, and I know that parents with young kids really appreciate it, especially with so many kids crossing and so much traffic in those areas. So good work to yourself and Kyla on that, as well as the integrated enforcement that was done this summer with the Rcmp on stop signs in some high complaint areas. I do know that the residents on those intersections really appreciated that as well, to see actual response to ongoing concerns that hadn't been addressed in the past. So I think moving to a level 1 certainly has provided a higher level of service, and I look forward to further discussions at Strapline. All right, with that, no other questions. Thank you, Mr. Desatel, for your presentation, and I will call the question. All those in favor? Motion carried. Can I get a motion, please, that council accept administration's report on the 2021 municipal election as information? Councillor Taylor will make that motion, and we have Mr. Lucas with us, and Mr. Passy, corporate service manager, and Mr. Lucas, who's our executive assistant and ledge coordinator, to do the presentation. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Thank you and good evening, council. I'll share my screen here and begin with the presentation. All right. Is that showing up on council's end all right?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So as noted, this is administration's report on the 2021 municipal election. I'll provide a brief summary of the presentation. So we'll begin by just providing some overall commentary on the context of the election, including things like COVID-19 and staffing turnover and other contextual factors that affected the planning and outcomes of the election. Chat a little bit about voter engagement, looking at Edson in historical perspective, as well as in comparative perspective to other jurisdictions in Alberta. Do an assessment of the costs of the election. One subset of those costs being the tabulators, and we will assess the pros and cons of tabulator use in this election, because that was perhaps one of the biggest changes that we've seen since the 2017 election. Part of our consultation for preparing this report was to engage our external election workers, exploring their assessments of the planning team's conduct, the planning team's efforts in organizing the election, in engaging election workers, as well as the workers' assessment of the public's experience with the election. Finally, we'll look at an overall strengths and weaknesses analysis for the election in its entirety, which will inform some recommendations that we provide. So generally speaking, the context for this election was a challenging one. It was the 2021 election took place during a period of considerable dynamism and change, creating new challenges and uncertainties for town staff, but on the flip side, necessitating ongoing adaptation, which was enjoyable and we hope a challenge that administration rose to. But just to provide some of those, some insight into the context, because some of it may be of interest to council. A very important one is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. The election planning phase saw a very liberal approach from the provincial government to COVID-19 restrictions, with essentially no restrictions in place. And then in response to the Delta wave of the pandemic, implementing more stringent requirements, in particular things such as the restrictions exemption program. For returning officers throughout the province, this caused a great deal of uncertainty about what COVID-19 adaptations would be in place, and what COVID-19 adaptations would need to be implemented within the elections, as well as how the municipal election interacted with existing regulations. And for council's information, it's worth noting that programs such as the restrictions exemption program did not apply to the election, and administration was also advised that we were not meant to we're advised that the sanctity of the right to vote was quite important, and we're not meant to rigorously enforce even the requirements that did apply to the election, such as masking mandates and things like this, if there were obstinate electors who refused to comply. Again, their right to vote would still be respected. However, administration did make every effort to minimize the risk of disease transmission in the context of the election, and followed generally best public health practices such as social distancing, physical barriers, masking, etc. And proud to report that there was no noticeable increase in cases in the weeks following the election. Another contextual piece was just personnel changes ongoing at the time. Most of the elections planning team, it was their first time planning an election, and we obviously had new returning officer and myself being new to the organization as well. New technologies also created just new challenges and opportunities. Of course, the tabulators are the main point of consideration here. While this did require the development of new procedures, and especially new training procedures, we didn't notice any significant operational challenges with the tabulators, and generally they probably simplified a great deal of the conduct of the election. And finally, of course, a source of additional workload, but also more importantly, potential confusion for members of the public, was that this election looked a little bit different in that it involved a provincial ballot as well. So this was obviously for the nominations, or for Alberta's submissions to the federal government regarding who should be nominated to the federal Senate, as well as referendum questions on daylight savings time and equalization. Some of this was less than optimally communicated to Albertans by the provincial government, as well as we will discuss later in the presentation, by the municipality of Edson. So I want to discuss briefly voter engagement. So we had a total of 1,843 voters for a voter turnout of 26%. We've also listed the distribution of those voters between different types of voting opportunities. The main thing to note here, or the main thing that would be novel relative to the 2017 election, is simply that the advance vote was considerably more well attended than previous advance votes. This is likely attributable to, on the one hand, some wariness on the part of electors from attending the polling station, given potential concerns around COVID-19 transmission at a more highly attended polling station. But then as well, holding the advance vote on Saturday and doing it throughout the entire day would also be conducive to encouraging voters to come out. This slide offers a comparative analysis of voter engagement in Edson. So we have on the left-hand side historical turnout in our communities for all elections from 2001 onwards. These were the elections for which data was available from the provincial government. And what we see is that election turnout, or voter turnout, is strikingly consistent across elections, with a noticeable peak and trough in 2001 and 2004, or 2004 and 2007, sorry. Otherwise, the long run average over the course of all of these elections was 27%, and the 2021 turnout of 26% falls pretty closely in line with that long run average, particularly given, again, the pandemic context, which there is always some concern would have discouraged some people attending at the polling station. Turning now to a geographic comparison. Throughout Alberta, where voter turnout was publicized by the provincial government, we have an average of 38% of electors showing up to the polls, and for Albertan towns, 36% of electors showing up to the polls. So we see about a 10% gap this year between Edson and our natural comparator in Albertan towns. However, it is worth noting that this appears to be a structural feature of Edson democracy, given historical trends, as well as it's worth noting that as the bell curve graph shows, voter turnout ranges in that 25 to 31% are quite common. In fact, we see here that over 20 municipalities have similar voter turnouts or voter turnouts that fall within that range, and that's one of the most common kind of buckets to be in. And I'll now pass the floor to our returning officer, Mike Passy.
Thank you, Daniel. So the overall cost of the election to run it for this past one was $33,000 or $33,737. Majority of this was through the contracted services, or half of it was that, and that's for the tabulators, machines, and the associated services along with that. And then 25% was the hiring of labor, 6% for supplies, 18% for advertising, and about 1% for sanitary supplies for to react to the that we were dealing in an election during the pandemic. In recognition, oh, sorry, if you can just move back, Daniel. Sorry, in recognition, the province in running the referendum and the Senate questions, the province did supply a subsidy amount of $2 per capita, offsetting the cost of running our election by 16,000 and some change. And then there was also a subsidy from Elections Alberta for the cost of printing the ballots for those questions as well. So we ended up offsetting the cost of the election by $17,300, which leaves it about around the $16,000 mark overall cost. And so then next we'll talk about assessing the tabulators use. So the pros for using the tabulators was that they are quicker in processing and the publication of the results following the close of the polling stations. It eliminates the human error in the ballot counting. What is put in there is into the machine is then produced on the ticker tape at the end of the night. And then if there's an error in the marking of the ballot or something doesn't read quite right, it gives a message. It would give a message, and election officials were able to address that and provide a new ballot to the elector to make sure that their vote was able to be used. Reduce the staffing requirements in having to hire additional staff to count the ballots into the evening, which I believe historically has taken several hours to do so. And then, as I mentioned before, it eliminates the idea of these wasted ballots that an elector doesn't have their vote counted because they are given almost immediate feedback on their vote. The cons to using the tabulators is that they do come at a cost, so about $16,000 to use them, and that's in this election. Part of that cost, though, would not be a repeating cost if they were to be used in the next election. Some of that cost was attributed to being at the first time that the municipality of Edson used the tabulators, that we received some extra training where they sent a staff member to train us how to use the machines. And also they provided an on-site person on election day to address any concerns with the machines if one wasn't working or the software wasn't working, to be able to address that. Going forward, we had, or on election day, we had 0 problems with the machines. And so going forward, it would be not necessary to have someone attend on site to deal with that, because they also do have a customer line, a tech support line to call immediately, where they have people on hand to deal with anything that is occurring. Plus, there's the built-in redundancy of having multiple machines. If one goes down, we had a total of 4 machines in this election. And so if one were to go down, we still had 3 functioning machines to continue to process ballots. Another con would be just the novelty of the machines. A new way of doing something is sometimes a little more difficult to make sure things are processed, and then also maybe some potential public confusion or mistrust. We did send out a survey to the election workers just to gauge their response on how they felt it the day went, how they were comfortable with how things were, and if they had any suggestions on what could be done differently. So we sent it out to all of our workers. We got 10 responses, and so that was about roughly about half of the workers. And so then what they indicated was that they were, majority were very satisfied, or they were 50% satisfied with the training they received on their experience on the election day. Again, on the satisfied spectrum, so very satisfied at 70%, 20% satisfied, and 10% were somewhat satisfied. And their assessment of the public's experience of the day of was 40% to be very successful and 60% to be successful. And then some of the comments that they included in their responses were that they enjoyed learning about and contributing to the democratic process. They had a positive assessment of the management team and organization. And one thing that was often seen was mentioning of the long lineups and the need for more workers and registration tables to reduce how long people were in line to be able to cast their vote. So then overall, in assessing the election and the strengths and weaknesses that we saw, one of the strengths that we saw was the adaptability. So when the day started out, we started off with 3 registration tables, thinking that would be sufficient based on the needs we saw at the advanced vote, where we had 1 registration table at the advanced vote and 2 privacy shields for people to cast their votes. And the bottleneck we found at that one was that there was not enough voting screens, and so we ended up getting more for the advanced vote. When we got to the election day, we had plenty of voting screens, but then learned that the bottleneck was the registration desk. And so in order to continue to move people through, we ended up opening up new desks or new tables for registration. We ended the night with, I believe, 7 registration tables. And another strength would be the compliance with the public health practices. We had staff going around and sanitizing the voting screens. They were sanitizing the pens that the workers and the electors were using to fill out information. They were wiping down the privacy screens for holding the ballots so that no one could see what they had voted. And then it also just out in the area, just sanitizing wherever they could. The strength would be the worker satisfaction. We received many compliments and congratulatory remarks based on how the day was going and the ability to adapt and make this run smoothly. And again, the advanced vote, like Daniel mentioned, was having the advanced vote occur at the Leisure Center hospitality room. Holding it on a Saturday for the full day allowed that to have a greater turnout. There was several hockey events going on that day, so there were people in the arena. We put signage at the entrance to let people know that the election, that the advanced vote was occurring around the back of the building. And Daniel alluded to in the past that this was more than had happened in the previous year. The previous election, there was 1 advanced vote on I believe it was a Tuesday or a Thursday evening from 4 till 8 p.m. And I think there was 70 or 80 people who cast their vote at that time. And so we were pleasantly surprised by the increase of people who took the advantage to use the advanced vote. Weaknesses were, again, that there was quite large lineups on election day. And so this can be attributed to a couple of issues. Is that one, the line looked longer than maybe it actually was, just due to physical distancing within the Legion. And so the lineup would occasionally reach to the corner of the Legion building, to the sidewalk along 6th Ave. When I would go check, I only think once or twice that it actually started to come around the corner and down the sidewalk. We received information. We would ask people regularly, hey, how long were you waiting in line, trying to gauge how long they were in line? And it seems to never exceed 30 minutes from when they got in line to being able to cast their vote and leave. So yes, it's a sizable chunk of the day and of their time, and we alleviated that by opening up new registration tables. But one of the recommendations we'll have coming up is to start off with more registration tables. Then again, another weakness would be the communications and the public understanding of the voting opportunities and the provincial ballots. We suppose that if there had been more advertising for the advance vote, that maybe we would have had a larger turnout at that location, that time, as well as the ability for the special ballots and to mail in their ballots rather than have to show up on election day. Then again, the low voter turnout, I think it was 26%. We would obviously like to see that where more people engaged in voting, and then the special ballot process being that it's a very cumbersome process of having to fill out these different forms, submit the forms, get them mailed to you, and making sure your ballots are included in a specific envelope and order, where it can be a tedious matter, and if not done correctly, the ballot is required to be rejected. However, we only had to reject one special ballot that we received. So then our recommendations that we would recommend going forward in the election occurring in 2025 would be to hold additional advance votes. We saw the interest in having that availability and being able to do that more. And so having a few more, one or two or three more advance vote opportunities to capture various times when residents would be able to vote. So including the Saturday option, or an evening in the week, or during a weekday, to just give residents a greater opportunity to be able to cast their vote. Another recommendation is to enhance the public awareness and engagement through a robust communication strategy. So making sure that the voting opportunities are well known to residents and what they can, when and where they can vote, and making sure that it's well advertised. And then also what's on the ballot, the voting purpose. So that was one thing we saw with the provincial questions, is that residents often didn't know that was even an opportunity, or what they were needing to use that for. So that took up a lot of time at the registration table to explain what the vote that was occurring at that time was. And we did receive some feedback from Elections Alberta where they intentionally delayed providing information on those two questions, so as not to confuse with the federal election that happened in the weeks leading up to it. They didn't want to have that crossover of having these provincial questions being confused with the federal election that was occurring. I don't know, I'm sure many of you received their pamphlet they sent out to every home. They said that where it was explaining what those questions were, that some of those pamphlets weren't even delivered by October 18th to some homes in Alberta. So they were quite a bit behind on their delivery of that. We would also recommend additional workers and registration tables to reduce lines. This would also help to reduce the reliance on town staff running the election, and ensuring that the election is more community-led and the members of the community are running the election. And then the recommendation is to explore alternatives to the institutional voting stations. So the institutional voting stations require a considerable amount of staff time to get those votes and get the people to cast their votes. And so our recommendation would be to, and other municipalities do as well, is to provide a group of special ballots to the institutions, and it also allows for a greater assistance in being able to fill out the ballots. We felt this would be a way to have it be a simpler process for those in the lodge and in the long-term care facility to be able to cast their votes and receive any help and assistance they would need it as well, while also reducing the required amount of election worker time to receive those ballots. And the recommendation is to lobby for simpler and expanded special ballot process. There was no opportunity given for people who may have felt uncomfortable going out to the public to vote and going to the Legion where there'd be quite a few people gathered together during the pandemic, and so there's only a few reasons why a person could use or could request a special ballot. And the province did not make any concessions during the pandemic to allow for a greater use of it. And so seeing perhaps a widening of the requirements and eligibility for receiving a special ballot would be something good to see in the future. And finally, we would recommend, this would be for the returning officer and those working, to automate the final vote tallying to further expedite the results. The tabulators are great because they printed out what was fed into each machine. But then once we had those ticker tapes, we had a piece of paper where we were writing down, what the totals were on that. And so having a prepared Excel spreadsheet or so to punch in the numbers and get the final results quicker would be certainly a way to get that answer a little quicker and provide the results to those who are anxiously awaiting them. So that's our debrief on the election and how that went this past time. And so we'd be happy to answer any questions and field anything from council.
All right, thank you, Mr. Passy and Mr. Lucas, for your presentation. Council Warren.
To the mayor through to Mr. Passy. Do we have any idea how many other jurisdictions used tabulator machines?
I don't have a figure on that. Based on my conversations with the company who provided them, I know it was their own company did run several elections here in Alberta alone, but I couldn't say how many municipalities.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Bevan.
Through the chair to administration there. One thing I did hear and they asked was that if it is possible to hold our advanced polls and our main election day all at one facility, instead of putting it out there, we went to Repsol and you went to the Legion or you went to the other place down here at one time. It made it simpler for them just to say, okay, we're going strictly to the Legion, and they knew that. And it made it more sense that they were going to one place instead of going to two different places for advanced poll.
Through the mayor to Councillor Bevan, yes, I believe that would be an option to consider that in the coming election in 2025. We've discussed the option of the idea of having multiple locations as well to reach as many residents as possible to be able to vote. So the Legion was considered as well. The hospitality suite worked well because it's a central location in the community as well. If I recall correctly, I believe the Legion was not available the day we wanted to run the advanced vote, and there was and we were able to keep it at the hospitality suite and use that space effectively as well. But in the future, absolutely, there would be an opportunity to try to keep things more centralized and see where guide people to one location.
And if I may add to that, through the mayor to Councillor Bevan, another facet of the trade-offs and just overall considerations relevant to such a decision is, the trade-off as well between the conceptual simplicity of having one polling station across the entire election, as opposed to additional costs of facility rentals, say for the Legion relative to Repsol Place Hospitality Suite.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody else have any further questions, comments, or concerns? Go ahead, Councillor Basici.
Mayor, through to the administration there. The only thing I thought it was personally about tabulators they are nice and fast. And maybe from a candidate's point of view, and since we're all at the same table, it would have been nice to have some kind of a display so as the tallies came in, they were broadcasted because it was quite a bit of panic, everybody trying to figure out who was where. So it's the only thing that would have been really nice to have, even if it was a TV attached to a computer, so you enter each set and then people would know where they're at. So it's the only recommendation I would have to make it a better, I mean, besides recommendations you guys have made, the only recommendation from a candidate point of view.
Through the mayor to Councillor Pisichny, yes, I think that would be absolutely beneficial as a way, as part of that fifth recommendation, automating that to have that available. I remember on the night of, providing the numbers and all the candidates huddling around the ticker tape and trying to see where it was. So yes, I think that would be a great recommendation, a great addition to providing the results.
All right, anybody else? I would have to agree that something to have everybody see the tallies that are coming in will be beneficial. And I do recall, Councillor Pisichny, there was some spoiled ballots in the beginning from the institutional votes too. There was an issue with, I believe, them not being signed properly or filled out properly. So if that were to occur at an institution, I think that's one area that we would have to deal with, because we're, as candidates, as we're seeing the ballots going in and getting rejected out of the first batch, we're starting to have a bit of a heart attack. Luckily, it was only just the first 5 or 6, but we thought the whole system would have been a problem. But luckily, that was not the case. And I think the tabulators were wonderful. We had our results out, and everybody else in other surrounding communities were wondering what was going on because we were so quick. So. Councillor Moore.
If I may add just a little observation, I know in past elections, it was always the X marked, and this time we had to fill in the little circle. That might have confused some people who had automatically thought about X's in the past.
Councillor Schnard.
Actually, just a comment, I think even bringing a simple piece of paper, because I remember when we were doing the tally, nobody had a pen and paper. So even where we're saying,
yeah, very true.
But even when we're saying instead of electronic board, we could even have some kind of a simple whiteboard we could have wrote it down. Because I remember going, okay, we can't use phones, we can't do nothing, and the chalkboard would have been nice. So just a comment.
All right, thank you very much. We're running out of time here for the meeting, so thank you very much, gentlemen, for your presentation. And
make a motion to extend it?
No, we're not making a motion to extend. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carried. No sundry items, council committee reports. We're going back to January the 19th. And who is ready? Councillor Schnard.
I believe I have nothing to report. Did all last week.
All right, sounds good. Councillor Byer.
Thank you. On January 19th, I actually had 2 homelessness task force meetings. The first one, we talked about the $150,000 grant that came in, and that the kind of for the shelter pod group with reflections there now, kind of how they've been utilizing that. They've been able to extend the hours of reflections. They've been able to hire security, as well as offer some meals on the weekends at reflections, which can assist in their ventures there. And that we're trying to get a homelessness count. We started that before COVID, and then it got put on hold. So we're working on that. The second meeting was regarding a local resident who's looking at a sober, looking at possibly putting some type of a sober living housing complex in town. There's many details to be worked out on that, but it seemed promising, and that person was also maybe interested in providing most of the finances for that. So I won't make any more comments on that, but definitely some things to look into there. And then also that same day, January 19th, I attended a webinar on the Alberta municipalities, which was formerly AUMA, on the PricewaterhouseCoopers report on the breakdown of the the UCP looking towards a provincial police force and the engagements that we'll be having with this whole Gens group in late March, and talking to different towns and cities in Alberta, which I think everybody there was completely against going this direction, but trying to be unified and sharing common questions and concerns. And then I believe we did just get an email in the last day or two regarding the questions that came as a result of that webinar. And January 27th, I had a Community Futures West Yellowhead meeting, which Nancy, I believe, mentioned most of the information earlier in her presentation. And yeah, that is all I have to report.
Thank you, Councillor Bevan.
Okay, January 27th, the Community Futures meeting here. Nancy touched on a lot of it here. She has some training sessions coming up here on February 2nd. It's virtual here. Nonprofit risk management part 1 starts at 6:30 to 8:30. March the 2nd is a nonprofit risk management part 2. And then March 17th from 9 to 12 is financial planning for nonprofit organizations and they were putting that on. So if you want to get online, you can get a hold of Nancy and do that. I guess when we had a roundtable discussion here, one of the things that was brought up was Grand Cache as of February 28th is no longer going to have a medical clinic there. They are really struggling with doctors here and that. So they're just putting it out there that they're in dire straits for medical people up there right now. So feel sorry for the people that are going to have to travel now. So that's it for my report.
Councillor Moore.
Yes, last Wednesday I attended virtually in a Zoom with Economic Development Association of Alberta, and interesting talks. They were bringing up different things which we have delved into before at I believe Alberta municipalities. I mentioned about the hydrogen possibilities that are around the province. Also Bitcoin and crypto center in Calgary. A lot of people, a lot of experts seem to think crypto and Bitcoin will really take over the financial world this year. So we'll see what has to happen there. This was a very short presentation. It went from only noon to 1 p.m. So even though it was short, it had a lot of great ideas, and I'd be interested to see if lots of them come to pass. So I took a lot of enjoyment from that meeting.
All right, thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Position.
Like one thing to report on the 26th, I attended along with yourself, the mayor, the West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority. Point of interest out of there is the committee has voted to move the management and hold off management of the authority over to and the staffing over to Yellowhead County. That's all I have to report.
All right, Councillor Taylor.
Through the mayor, on January 19th, along with Mayor Zahara and Councillor Byer, attended the homelessness task force meeting. Councillor Byer has already gone through the details of that. Same day, on January 19th, I attended the second homelessness task force. Councillor Byer elaborated on that already. Same day, January 19th, I attended a library board meeting, and takeaway from that is they are proceeding with the architect regarding the renovations. Architect's going to be in the community shortly to just have discussions with their staff. We're trying to fund the renovations internally at this time, but just getting ideas about restructuring the facility, and it's exciting that it's moving along. And then on January 31st, I attended a regional library orientation with the Yellowhead Regional Library Board, and it was interesting to learn the ins and outs of that organization and how it is structured. That's it.
All right, thank you. January 19th, the homelessness task force, it's been already covered there. I just want to say that it's great that we did receive, Reflections received the $150,000 grant to help with the running of the pods. Marcia Jansen is the housing and services coordinator, and she's actually going to be leading the charge on the homelessness count, which is a resource that we were missing for so long. So we have somebody actually kind of coordinating that. So that was a very good meeting and a lot of good discussion around homelessness. One thing to note, there's less homelessness showing up at the hospital since the pod's open with frozen toes and things of that nature, and people not sleeping in the lobby of the hospital. So it is having a positive impact that way. And then attended the Alberta Municipalities Police Force webinar. Lots of good questions there. Just a reminder to council, the National Police Federation webinars on February 28th, and then on March 31st will be the government engagement, which really isn't an engagement. They just tell you what they're doing and break down the report based on conversations I've had with mayors this week. There's no political representation there, and they only allowed for 10 minutes worth of questions at the end of their presentation. And basically we're told the municipalities are the child of the province. So it's good to get that perspective, but I do encourage everybody to attend to make sure that our voices are heard. And then on the 26th, the West Yellowhead Regional Waste, which Councillor Pichichny reviewed. With that, no financial items. Questions for media and public regarding items from this council meeting? Do you have Adrian with us?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I know you're running out of time, so I'll try to be quick. I do have a couple questions. With regards to snow removal, there's always signs up saying it's a tow zone. I'm wondering if any vehicles are ever towed and how much faster snow removal would be if the streets were cleared of vehicles.
Mr. Kitlitz or Mr. Fisher, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, through the mayor to Adrian, we did have our crews basically doing some door knocking and coordinating with our protective services group to raise awareness of the issue. I don't believe we did any towing this year. I don't think that was in the cards. Obviously, it does make our job easier, especially in residential areas, if the vehicles are off of the streets as much as possible when we're working in the areas. Not only can we maneuver better with our equipment, we actually do a better job because we can go curb to curb. And there are areas like Hillendale, for example, when they were down there with the snow accumulation that we were clearing, it was very, very difficult for them to actually create a windrow and clear it with the vehicles on the side. So they ended up taking multiple passes in those spaces to get areas cleaned. So I hope that answers your question, Adrian.
Yes, I would, other than just wondering how much quicker it would be.
Adrian, I'm just going to need a motion to extend our time. Councillor Chenard, all those in favor? Thank you. Go ahead, Adrian.
Sorry, other than I'm just wondering how much quicker it would be. Easier for sure, but would it be quicker? Like, would it be worth towing the vehicles? People would move the next time.
Yeah, we're having conversations about that. I don't know how much quicker it would be. I don't think I can quantify that, Adrian, and it varies by area. There are areas where we couldn't get in with our equipment and just skipped because they didn't clear the vehicles off the street.
Councillor Pichichny, have a comment?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through to Adrian. I don't know if you remember Adrian or not, but the town used to hire a contract a tow truck for the days, and they would haul their to a proposed location in town. It came with a lot of challenges at the time because everybody's vehicle, people wouldn't know where their vehicle was. Some people were out of town working, their vehicle would be sitting in the slot for days. People would accuse the town of damaging their vehicles. And it became a huge challenge to the municipality in that process. So I think that if we were to look at it again as a municipality, we'd have to look at it from a point where if we're towing it to an impound yard and pay impound fees. And that'll come with its own challenges to the municipality as well if you do that. So it's the option is there. We've tried it in the past. It was faster. It did do a better job, but it was a tremendous amount of work of tagging and towing.
Okay.
And just further to that comment, it's a resource issue too. As noted earlier tonight, we at the best of times have 2 CPOs and we're dealing with multiple vehicles, shift work, etc. We had experienced occasions where windrows were left overnight and people still parked on the street. So clearly they knew snow removal was ongoing and people couldn't pass through because the street was so narrow. So it's something that we'll have to continue to talk about and deal with. Councillor Sharp.
Just a comment to that, where I heard Pat talk about skip the neighborhood. There'd be a good way to advertise. You're complaining your snow's not clean, but yet you park, so we can advertise because you didn't move vehicles, we skipped it. Be an easy way to move on.
Any other questions, Adrian?
I do have one more. I think the rest I can do as follow-ups, but one more with regard to snow removal. I know it was mentioned that when in comparing with other communities, the question was not asked that how effective that was, or what the response of those community residents was for that snow removal. I'm wondering why you wouldn't ask such a basic question. It's great that White Court does it one way, or Devon or Cold Lake, but why would we copy something that's not effective? Or do we know for sure that it is effective?
Mr. Kitlitz?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So I think really that was just a case of the time. I mean, we were asking these questions the last couple of weeks. Every one of these municipalities were deep into snow removal, just like we were. As mentioned in the presentation, we hope to bring this policy back to council in the spring. We'll endeavor to get some of that information from these other municipalities on success of their policies.
Go ahead, Mr. Fisher.
Yeah, thank you. With just elaborating on some of that, some of the feedback we did get from some of the other municipalities is that they're also experiencing a lot of the same challenges that we are in terms of staffing, dealing with the weather fluctuations. The ones that weren't clearing alleyways and lanes, we're also having to look at that as well, and struggling with financial resources and making it all work as well. So just if that helps, that was contextually, they were all in a similar boat, feeling the pinch.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Or you're good?
No, I'm good for the night. Thank you.
And just another comment, Adrian, is that I know we were in a bit of a pickle at the beginning of this, but one of the things that from my perspective, that I think was good is through this process, we were able to utilize local contractors, which created jobs and work and employment as well. And they've done a really remarkable job. And I think we had 4 or 5 different contractors. Was it 5, Pat?
I'm just doing the mental tally. It's at least 5. I think there might be 6, but I gotta go back and double check.
So I think it was good too. We in this process, we were able to reinvest in the community as well and create some of those opportunities. All right, with that, I will call a motion for adjournment. Councillor Chenard, all those in favor? Motion carried.
Just waiting there.